And almost there now. I'm going to bear with me. I'm just about ready. Okay, let me see here. Let me see. I need to start the broadcast. Okay, as far as I can tell, all systems are go here. If I could just get a sound check from somebody to make sure the sound is working on the live stream.
Yes, Rick.
Oh, perfect, thank you. I do hear the chimes working in Zoom, which I intend to put a stop to. Yeah, let me do that. There we go. I have a couple of attendees that I'll promote, and now I will start the show. Okay, welcome everyone to the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group for Wednesday, September 5th, 2018. My name's Rick Crammond. I'll be your host tonight, and we'll explore the world of Keshe creations and ideas primarily, but we diverge occasionally into actually many other topics along the way as we explain the workings of the universe and practice the ways of the universe in our devices, if all goes well. Okay, and let's dive in to see if there's any offerings for today as far as anybody has some input they would like to put in. Now would be a good time. Looking at the list here. Anybody have?
I'm down from Romania.
Hello, Dan. Dan, is something
yes,
you wanted to show?
It's a kind of question.
A question, okay.
It's a kind of question. In a Facebook group, I have one friend is making a coil maggrav in one piece of wire. And I see how to know how. It's direction of, which means making gravitational, extension of gravitational inside. And I see making magnetical, magnetical, and after in the external inner, it's making also gravitational extension, gravitational, and magnetical. I put this question: why you're thinking, Mr. Keshe, saying it's important when you have connection between stackers? It's not learning for making in one piece. Because saying, oh, in first workshop, Mr. Keshe is saying it's not, it's better one wire, it's not starting this. I know it's not starting nano-code, but it's important when you have a connection between the stackers and the coil. Right? This is the question. Why Mr. Keshe saying with connection? Because you can make a gradient with a different gas. When you have one piece, you can only with fire or soda with a caustic, and you make a gradient from number of coil or between 10 seconds. My question is,
you're talking, we should probably have a diagram here so we know more what you're actually talking about.
okay, whiteboard.
All right, if you want to.
Whiteboard. Okay, Mr. Keshe is saying, no? In usual, making this gravitational extension, and you making another gravitational external ring, an extension, and return from gravitational, right?
From gravitational to magnetical, you mean?
Yes. This guy making in this way. It's first question when I meet you. Gravitational extension and return with magnetical. It's better when I'm making this way from gravitational and magnetical. This is gravitational, also with extension of. This is magnetical for inner coil. And after you make gravitational for outer coil and return gravitational and return with magnetical.
Right. So
I don't know. It's
what you're saying is the connection, that it can be done all in one wire rather than making the connections. Is that what you're saying?
It's a way why Mr. Keshe is saying gravitational extension of gravitational, another gravitational, and after is returning with magnetical. My question is why not we use gravitational returning with magnetical, again gravitational returning with magnetical. What purpose it accumulate gradient? This is my question because I don't know what the answer of these guys. Perhaps it's better making two magrav and confront and making measurement.
Maybe you should have kept the drawing on so we could talk about it, but I'm not quite clear what the question is or what you mean, but the way I look at it is the inner gravitational, or the inner wire, you could say, feeds into the outer. This one feeds into the other, and that helps give that gradient in the numbers of coils and the radius of the coils and so on. So that way you get the inner coil interacting with the outer coil, and they're both connected, but they're connected through the twisting of the wire generally, and that's a different kind of connection than a direct wire connection of the copper inside. So I think it's important to understand that it's a plasmatic connection occurring, and it's different to have the coils twisted together than it is to have one continuous wire. Is that what you mean? Having the coils made out of one continuous wire?
Yes, which means without a connection, it's one thing. When you have a connection, you can control flux of energy. No, because I know between nanocoat and nanocoat plasma flow between, but it's important having a connection or not, which means why gravitational after magnetic and magnetic, and why not gravitational magnetic, gravitational magnetic?
Can anybody else help with that question that are here in our panelists today? Anybody help Dan with, or help us all with some understanding of them? I'm just trying to see if there's anything in the chat as well here that might have come up. Peter, see your mic's open. There's something you wanted to comment on there? Or are you just doing a mic check? Oh, it came open again, but no sound came out, Peter. Just you could hear like a sort of a microphone sound, but no verbal sound. Got a couple of attendees. Let me promote them to panelists here. Maybe Jalal will have something to say.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, thank you, Peter. That's coming through loud and clear now.
So, what I think the issue is with Dan's problem there is that when you look at what gravity actually is, so you say gravitational magnetical, well, in any type of phase convergence that's why you twist the wires, is you're forcing phase convergence of double magnetism, because it is always known that standard magnetism is stable, so it's universally stable, but the electromagnetism causing is the flux. So upon the twisting wires, and then since gravity is phase convergence of double magnetism, and it would be on the flux side, so more electromagnetic, then that means it would be the variable going across the constant. And then it's the same as what gravity is the phase convergence of double magnetism. It's even in Keshe's new patent there, it states about double magnetism, and it's pretty much stated in front of everybody, you know. So that would be the solution to this problem, is that the twisting of the wires would be beneficial, because in all maggravs, dealing with any combining of gravitational and magnetical, I do gravitational with like quotes, right? Then, you know, the more pure the convergence and the more powerful the output is what everybody's looking for. Supposedly, I'm waiting to see one plasma unit actually run a decent load and be over unity, you know, instead of just power augmentation and efficiency. So it's kind of...
That will be the ultimate holy grail of this situation, yes.
Okay, thank you, Pete.
That's a good point of view. Like one thing, maybe I can make a whiteboard here and just show one idea, and we can talk about it. And let me just zoom in here. So, oops, there we go. So we have, as far as the connections go, there's different ways to connect, of course, but if you have two wires and you want to, there's two ways. One is to just twist the two wires together so they're twisted with each other, and you end up with a couple of pigtails. And if these are nano-coated wire, then there isn't necessarily an electrical connection between them, but there will be a plasmatic connection. So if we're dealing with plasmatic connections, then there's I think it's called the Armen connection, which is one wire comes out like this, and you attach the other wire to it by doing a series of loops around this wire and ending up going to your next connection. And that can provide for a kind of a one-way plasmatic flow. It allows the, especially if for example, this end might be turned in on itself, and or this one as well can be turned in on itself, and that establishes this area as the plasma connection in between. And theoretically, if the nano coating is not broken in this wrapping and other part, then it establishes that plasmatic interface between them, and it produces a flow. And I believe that the flow would be going this way in this case with the plasmatic connection. So now, as far as the gravitational, like if the center wire, initially when we were looking at the coils, the center wire was usually a pin that was turned in on itself, and that became the gravitational center. The center is the gravitational, and then the wrapping around it would be the magnetical connection to it. So it makes sense in a way if you wanted to put this in, say, series with another one that was similar, then you would hook up the gravitational of that one to the magnetical, and it would sort of start it's like hooking batteries, positive to negative and positive to negative, to increase the voltage of a series of batteries when you put them in series. If you put them in parallel, it would have the same voltage but increase the amperage. So I'm not sure if that was helpful to you or not, Dan, but is there anybody else?
Because it's like a filter,
yes,
which means like a diode.
Yeah.
Passing or more gravitational or more. No, it's one concept. It's not more or less. It's predominant.
It's what? What was the last word?
Predominant.
Predominant.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's a good way to look at it. It tends to create a path for the plasma, let's say. And we're trying to the plasma.
Like a filter.
Yeah, and very much like a diode as well. And if you look at the nano coating, for example, oops, how did I get that all of a sudden? Just a minute here. Where's my annotate tool? There we are, draw. If we had, if you look at the, okay, I've got something happening here in just a minute. I want draw, I want that. If you look at just sort of a cross-section area of Well, let's not do that. Let's just a second. Let's look at the cross section of a wire. Let's say a wire that this is the end of the wire. And if we look at, if these are all atoms on these inside the wire and on the edge of the wire, all the way around, etc., and all the way around. And then on the nano coating, it's like having these opened up. They're still stuck on there, but the atoms are opened up. And we have, of course, multiple layers, maybe 30, 40,000 layers of nano coating of atoms of copper that are opened up. And that provides for the plasmatic flow. The plasma likes to flow through the gaps. The gaps are the important thing between the layers. And that allows the plasma to flow, and that can create fields, of course, from that plasma flow, and makes this whole thing effective. And we don't have to, we're not so concerned about the core on all these copper atoms in the middle, but we're more concerned about the plasma current or the plasma flow on the outer part of this. Call it a conductor, but it's more of a superconductor even. And that's what scientists are discovering now, is superconducting properties, even at room temperature, between some of these nano-layered materials. And this is pretty exciting news to have the scientists confirm what Mr. Keshe has been talking about for well over 10 years. And there's just, we have to find more ways to unleash this plasma power that's encased in this nano-coated wire and nano-coated plates that we work with. There's, special techniques have to be used because we're dealing with nano-sized stuff, which is tiny wee. And, what's in these layers is very important. The specific gaps, the way the layers are created, the way the might be have other atoms in between that create certain other gaps and make it have more possibilities and more potential. And there's a lot that could be done just with that whole thing. And what I wanted to get back to is the idea of a diode, which is built into this whole structure already. Because if you think about it, the outer part of this nano coating, let's just extend the nano coating over the whole wire here, let's say. And if you look at the gradient between the copper element here, the copper inside from the center of this wire to the outside edge of it, it's all tightly bound copper atoms, let's say. And then from here to here is this nano layering. And between the two, if you were to put an ohm meter and measure the resistance of this wire, you would find it has in the megohms of resistance, which means millions of ohms, which means very high resistance. Yet, if you were to measure lengthwise, you would find it has very little resistance lengthwise inside these layers, and they're interconnected, and they're alive with electricity. If you're to measure the voltage of the nano layers, there's huge potentials just between, well, huge in millivolts, but millivolts is big. When you try to measure plain copper, you'll get 0 in between all the atoms of the plain copper. But if you measure the voltage from one spot to another along the nanocoating, you quite often get, you know, up to maybe up to 300 millivolts, but quite often it'll be more in the 3 to 50 millivolt range, something like that, which is pretty significant, and it ranges just by holding the probes on there. So we have quite a big potential going on. We've got a potential for some interesting scenarios here. We've got the difference between the copper here and the perfect insulator here, and the difference in between is, say, within, you know, a very thin layer, we have, say, let's just say 1,000,000 ohms. Well, if you take and break that down and go into just the very thinnest of layers, then it will have a lesser number. So you can actually create a resistor across that. And not only that, but the electricity, or the, call it the measurement of electricity, shows it as going in one direction. It doesn't have, it has a potential. So we've got electrical potential. It acts as a diode in effect. So we have a resistor. Right, hang on a second. I'm going to do this differently because this gets, I'm going to just want to show this. We have a resistor. Make that bigger. Oh, that's good enough. We've got a diode. We've got conductors. We've got superconductor. We have got also the length of the wire itself acts as an antenna. And we have active electrical force in the whole system. We have EMF, electromotive force. You can measure it with your voltmeter. So what we have in effect are all the parts of a, put it at the top, crystal radio, which is quite interesting if you think about it. We have essentially, it's, you could call it a nano crystal radio, because each one of these copper parts of the layers here has the capability of being its own radio in a way, because it has all these parts attached to it. It is its own diode, resistor, conductor, superconductor, antenna, with its own supply and inlet and outlet of electricity. So each of these particles, in effect, is connected on a wide range of bandwidths, because it's, as Mr. Keshe says, it's the nano coating is so black, it absorbs all the bands, broad bandwidth in absorption. That's why we see black. Black is the absence of the reflection of color. So it absorbs all the colors of the visible spectrum, as well as there's a wide spectrum in the electromagnetic spectrum that's not just visual. So in effect, this simple piece of wire, even just a simple piece of, you know, straight nano-coated wire, has all these properties in it. And I'm convinced that even a short piece of wire that's cut to exactly the right distance and completely nano-coated and properly with specific layering and specific elements involved and so on, could very well act as an actual radio. And we might be able to pick up, it could be the actual antenna and the radio all built into one. You just have to find a way to tie into this system. It might be through wrapping a coil around it that goes to amplified speaker system that puts out the sound for you. And then maybe specific lengths of wire will tune to more specific than all bandwidths. It'll be to some specific bandwidth that will have some sort of response that will pick up on that particular bandwidth. So it's an idea to think about. It's there's a lot more to this simple process that we do as knowledge seekers of the nano coating, which can be from fire or it can be from the sodium hydroxide or lye. And I think that there's a lot of possibilities in that realm. Maybe we can connect with other universes through this. Because essentially, you have to look at each of these particles inside this nano coating is a crystal. It's a copper crystalline network that gets set up. And that can be specifically structured through the way we make the layers. And that becomes the crystal part of the crystal radio. Because in the olden days, I should say what a crystal radio is first, because maybe most people wouldn't know. In the olden days when I was young, back when I was young, we had what was called a crystal radio, and you can still get them and so on. But it's an extremely simple system, and you could even make your own radio back in World War II if you're stuck in a foxhole sometime. They called it Foxhole Radio, and I know Jay's been looking into that and so on.
Yeah, Rick, you wouldn't believe it. I just actually typed a big message there for you just before you even started talking about it, But I wanted to...
I see. I didn't read that.
But what I was trying to work out, I'm trying to know the cat whisker that you have the pencil lead and the razor blade. I'm just trying to work out what.
Okay, well let's look at that a little bit. So you're talking about this foxhole radio idea. Let's. I wish I could change my font size. I'm not sure if I can do that. Doesn't seem to. So we have what's called the Foxhole Radio, right? And it's got, let me see, the components would be what the double-edged razor blade, right? And so double-edged razor blade and a pencil, a sharpened pencil, right?
You see, whenever I connected it all, Rick, and I just put the earphone in.
Yeah, I'm just hearing you now. Mm-hmm. So razor blade, pencil lead, and then we have, there'll be an antenna of some sort. And if you're in the Army back in World War II, you might hook up to the barbed wire fence in your compound, for example. That made a good antenna. But if your boss found out, that is the captain or whoever is running the camp, you would be probably incarcerated because the Germans could actually track your radio system through the barbed wire fence, even though you're not even hooked up to electricity and so on, apparently. because these crystal radios, I need to tell people, they don't need any extra electricity. There are some you can add electricity to, but the primary crystal radio does not. I can't go back and fix that. The basic crystal radio does not have any electricity needed, and you can. Now you do need some way to hear, so there'd be usually an earphone. A special earphone was used in the back in the day in order to hear the actual signal. So back to these things, what Jay's question was, what is the idea between the double-edged razor blade and the sharpened pencil, which enables it to work as a radio, essentially, right? So what it is say we have a razor blade that looks like this. Usually it's got some holes in the middle like that, and it's used to fit into your razor. And this is before the days of disposable razor blades, if any of you can think back that far. And it's flat razor, 2 edges on it. Okay, so if you can think about that, what they would do, first of all, they would blue it by heating it. So when you heat steel and create that bluing or that surface, it's essentially a nano coating on the surface. So if you look at it really closely on the surface of the steel, let's say, then you'll find instead of all the atoms are tightly packed together here, there'll be a few layers. Oops, let me do that differently. And to show them more opened up, say at the upper. So these layers will be more opened up, and the blue just means a certain size nanoparticle. The same as when we see blue in our copper oxide solutions and so on. That's simply the reflection of the particles of a certain size ends up reflecting the blue light spectrum, and we see it as blue. And it absorbs all the other parts of the light spectrum. So same with this blued razor blade here. If I extend it out, this would be the sharp side here, let's say. And but the coating on it will actually be a nano coating, and it will be a crystalline structure. So when you have this coating and a crystalline structure, it becomes, like I was explaining before, a diode that allows a one-way flow. Okay, now if you combine that with your pencil tip coming in here, pencil tip, if you can imagine that here, sharpened pencil, graphite. So you got a conductor, graphite with a tip on it, and you've got this nano-coated surface of the steel. So essentially that allows a one-way flow through here, which when you have a radio signal that's got like an AM radio signal, if you want to be able to hear it, you have to turn it from a alternating current into basically like a pulse DC, or to have a series of peaks so you can actually make the speaker that you've got set up here, or earphone in this case, make the diaphragm vibrate back and forth. So it's got like a carrier signal and the AM voice or whatever else is coming through. It needs to have a diode. That's the big part of the crystal radio, is the diode. And the diode is usually a piece of germanium crystal inside of a little tube, tiny little tube. It'll have a tiny wee piece of germanium in there, crystal again. And it'll be actually not just germanium, but germanium oxide. So it'll be, and it'll have little wires to it basically, and it'll have a certain preset resistance one way and a lot bigger resistance the other way, so that it becomes a diode. And they test them at the factory and make sure they're all within specs and so on. And that little diode enables the crystal radio to work. And that's the same principle of the using the razor blade and the pencil tip, which is all you have handy. It might sometimes they also use a safety pin. So a safety pin has a little spring on it and a really pointy end. And then the other part you have in a base of wood or something to stabilize it. And you probe with this little safety pin into the nano coating of the safety blade or the razor blade. And in different places will be different resistances and different capacities and different diode functions. And when you hit just the right place, especially if you have a coil, it's helpful to have a coil as part of our, that's something I didn't put into our nano crystal radio, but generally the conductors are wrapped in a coil such that it amplifies the signal from the antenna. And when all that goes through this diode apparatus, then it essentially rectifies the AC signal into a DC signal that the speakers can use. So it's interesting that we talk about, nanotechnology now, but it's actually been around quite a long time. And people have never called it nanotechnology, but they've been creating things in the nano range of creation. But now it's gone, the whole topic has gone crazy, and it's now basically somewhere around $1 trillion a year industry, in the hundreds of billions for sure. And it's become one of the biggest buzzwords in technology now, the whole nano revolution. And they're starting to nail down the criteria of these nanoparticles and different types of layers that are being experimented with. And they find out that the thinner the layer, the more effective it can be at certain things. So to be an effective diode requires only a few layers of nanomaterials. That's why it works so well to just have to heat up a piece of iron or steel razor blade, and it changes color from the coating that forms on it. And that's enough to change the function of it electrically and electronically.
Hey, Rick, can I ask you a couple of questions just about it as
Sure.
well? You see, the way the blade turns blue in some spots, but not in the other spots? Is that because the particles all move about, and then when it cools, there's like a load on one side and maybe not as many on the other? Or
generally, it's more a case of either uneven heating. One part gets heated before the other side, or much more likely is there's a fingerprint on the razor blade, or a bit of corrosion or something different on that part. I see quite often with the plates, for example, if I've handled a brand new sparkly clean copper plate and get an oily fingerprint on it, which is very easy to do, you can actually see your fingerprint very distinctly on the plate a few days later. It shows up as a fingerprint. And then when you go to nanocoat it, it will actually show up as a blotch on the nanocoating. It won't nanocoat properly in that area unless you go and clean the plate again before the nanocoating by dipping it in vinegar and salt for a while, for half an hour. That'll clean it and so on. But even though fingerprints can be difficult to remove from using that process, so it's amazing what a difference that can make. I think that might be the case, and I've done that too with heating pennies and changing them in color. And if you don't clean them first, then they go all kinds of mottled colors. But if you clean them first, they have a sharper transition into turning completely black and so on, or other colors. So it's really important to have that metal super clean if you want a consistent nano coating. Some cases it may not matter and so on. It depends what you're making. Other cases it may be critical. If you're doing some sort of computer parts and working with certain nanomaterials, they have to have a super clean atmosphere in many of these processes. They can't have atoms that fall down on their workpiece because it changes the geometric pattern of the lattice of the crystalline structure, as Peter says in the chat here. Thank you for that, Peter.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
I was just going to say that was always wondered why it was called a crystal radio with the one that doesn't have the actual germanium crystal in it. You know, but now now you explain it that it's the crystalline and nano coating. You know, so that's
yeah. And there's other things they use too for crystal radios to. For example, you can have a chunk of germanium. Used to be the old way. You'd have it in a little holder, and you'd have this really granular, chunky-looking piece of germanium in there, a crystal, an actual chunky crystal. And then you'd have this sort of needle probe, the same sort of idea as I said before with the safety pin, but a more professional kind of deal with, they call it a cat's whisker. And that would probe into this crystal, chunky piece of crystal that was hooked into your electrical. And that was what I used when I was a kid, actually. That came with my crystal radio kit, was this piece of germanium and this cat whisker needle thing. And I would sit there and probe and try to find the radio stations because they needed the exact setting with this probe, and it was quite easy to dislodge it and lose the setting. You'd have to reset it the next day and so on. But it was really fun to be able to tune in a radio station without any electricity. Okay, well, probably enough about that unless there's any other questions.
The funny thing is the radio station is what's generating the electricity for it to pick up on.
Yes, right, true. The fields of the radio stations themselves, even though they can be very far away in some cases, they generate enough power in the antenna to activate the whole system and make the little diaphragm in the earphone rattle back and forth and hear the lovely voice of some performer or whatever it is you're tuning into. But it's the same basic idea for, I mean, you look at how crystals have been used. They use crystals in radios for transmitting as well, like CB radios or other transceivers and so on. You have a piece of quartz crystal that actually vibrates back and forth and at a certain frequency. And that'll be the frequency of your transmitter. There'll be very specific you know, I'm not sure, but it'll be something like 42.391 megahertz or something. And your friend might have a different set of walkie-talkies with 42.323 megahertz or something like that. And that difference would be enough that you couldn't hear each other on the same channel. You would have to switch the crystal to be able to hear each other on the same channel. So that's an important idea in a way, that crystals do have resonating frequencies, but they have to be a specific size in order to be at a specific frequency as well. So that ties into it. And the whole system. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, you know, the way, I wonder if anybody ever tried the same thing, but with all different types of crystals, instead of just the germanium and the quartz.
Yeah, I'm not sure if quartz will work or not. You have to have the right, it has to be the right kind of semiconductor situation. You know, I might be able to use a chunk of quartz in the right configuration. I'm not sure about that, but germanium ended up to be the best material for these little diodes that I showed here. Out of all the materials they tested. And there are diodes made out of other materials for other purposes, but many of them are not as efficient as the germanium ones were. Of course, now they have, you know, you have a little chip with, 10,000 transistors and resistors and diodes already built into it. And it's all on the nano scale with tiny wee components that you wouldn't even dream of trying to solder on or deal with in any way. And it's all embedded in a tiny wee chip that can do a million more things than the old crystal radio could. But on the other hand, that crystal radio setup, as I've proven many times, just using a very basic old-time crystal radio, like similar to, let me just get back to my video for a moment here. Like this little setup here is a little crystal radio, and it's got a very, very basic, funky system in there, and even that's more elaborate than what it could be for a crystal radio. Is one of the simplest basic systems that you could have in electronics or electrical. So it's but anyway, it's interesting for those that are into that sort of thing. Let me see, what's another example? I've got many of them that I've built over. This is another one I built, which is a crystal radio inside of a little tiny wee mason jar, shorty mason jar. And you can see, I'll show you the circuit. It almost looks complicated, but there's only like 4 parts on there. Most of it is just this fancy capacitor I put on that you don't really need something so fancy as that, but it's just part of the novelty of this particular one. And as there are as many kinds of reactors as there are stars in the universe, there's as many kinds of crystal radios as there are humans on the planet, times a million or so too. So probably less than the stars in the universe, but a lot of different iterations have been tried by the millions, especially if you're in the middle of the wartime and you're desperate and you just want to get some news from outside the camp that's not the usual PR from the captain. What's really going on in the outside world? And you have your radio man of the camp, and he'd be trying to, or actually not so much the radio man, but the other, the the infantry and whatnot, they would want to find out what's going on. They always find a way. Jay asks, could you run a few in series and power a light bulb for free? Well, you can actually power a light bulb from radio signals, but they're so weak that you would have to be very close to the radio station in order to do it, and have a big coil and so on set up to properly transduce that power. And so it can be done, but it's not, you're better off trying to do it some other way. Yeah, so anyway, let's get back to some of the other stuff. It's an interesting little diversion there, but it's related into the plasma teaching in many ways. Alrighty, anybody have something they'd like to bring up or show and tell at this point in time? Thomas, do you have any projects that you're working on these days that you might like to tell us about?
I was waiting for you to mention my name. Yeah, let me pull up my files. I actually don't have it here with me at the moment, but just give me 1 minute.
Okay, great, thank you. Trying to see who else might have something that they'd like to do. Zoltan, do you have any experiments that you're working on? If you can understand me. We'll wait for Thomas and see what he comes up with here. So he's got something fun that he's working on. Oh, let me promote the attendees here. Sorry, I have to, didn't see you here. Let me bring you in. There we go. Now you'll be less blinded. Okay, I guess Thomas is going to be another minute or two to get his pictures together there. Okay, what else have we got going? Let me think. Let me count the ways. Well, I could put in a plug for the for the private teachings coming up with the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. I think it is in just about 2 weeks from now. The private teachings will be opening with the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. And you can sign up as a private student and get all the recordings of the private teachings and have access to the website where they're held, and be able to play them back, as well as attend the live teachings that will be going on with various Keshe Foundation teachers in those private teachings. And there's lots of great information that comes out in that environment. And it's a kind of a fun group to be with, where you're with other people that are also of the same intention to learn and to elevate themselves through this teaching. And there's also opportunities to host the teachings, the private teachings. If there's anybody here or who is hearing my voice that's interested or could be possibly convinced into being a host for these private teachings coming up in a couple of weeks, please get a hold of the education department. I believe it's education at keshefoundation.org. And you have to be a student in order to become a host for the private teachings. And once you're set up and have cleared all that, then you can go through the trainings, very sort of basic training, how to be a host, and have someone help you to go through that process. And it's a great service to do that volunteer work in order to help the teachers do their job, so they're not distracted by things in the environment that they don't need to deal with besides the teaching itself, which is enough to focus on at one time. So the hosts help make things go smooth and make sure that people have their connections proper and all the recording is done and that kind of thing. So, and it's a great foot in the door for the Keshe Foundation. It allows people to get to know, get the Keshe Foundation to know you, and you get to know the Keshe Foundation. Aha, I've got a picture here. Let me, oh, wait a minute. That's a video. Okay.
Yeah, can you cue that up? My internet connection will not allow that video to be shared.
Right.
No music. It's all good.
Okay. And I have to do it in a different way. It should download it first. Maybe let me see if I can do that, and then I can play it a lot better without. Can't go to full screen because it takes out my whole screen here. So just bear with me a minute.
No worries. I could share a photo of it for the intern.
Yeah, share a photo of it. It's going to take me a couple of minutes to download here. And then I'll play the video. Ah, I recognize this immediately. Does anybody else recognize what this is? This is a test of your knowledge. Come on, chime in. Somebody tell me what it is.
I'll give them a hint. It spins.
Tesla turbine.
What? Say again, Jay?
Tesla turbine?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed it is. That's the magic word, Tesla turbine. And this is actually something I was very interested in for quite a long period of my life. I thought it was going to be as Nikola Tesla himself thought, that this was going to be the greatest invention that would change all of mankind and stop all of the engines that burn fuels would be scrap after this invention came out. And that was in I think around 1908 or something like that. He said all the fuel burning engines would be scrapped, and his friend that he was talking to was shocked and said that would be a very large pile of scrap, and left the room. But Tesla was all excited and very, very impressed with the performance of his turbine, which used only discs inside. There was no cups or vanes or blades, just flat discs or how the turbine works. And that's his claim to fame, and it has a lot of properties that are desirable. And I still think that the Tesla turbine could have its purpose in the world. But let's let Tom talk about his turbine there. And I see my video didn't, it wouldn't take that. It wouldn't, I'm going to have to play it directly from the.
Oh, it wouldn't download?
Thing. Yeah, some glitch here, so that's okay. I'll just do it differently and
okay.
See. I'll just expand the picture as much as I can. Oops.
So
Okay,
this is just a prototype for the initial testing phase of it, just to see what it can do and if my specs and parameters are correct. And this is my first go at it. So it is mostly made out of printed PLA plastic, and it's about 90 millimeters in diameter, or about 2.5 inches approximately, the discs. And it's about 100, it's about 75 millimeters in top to bottom, from the top of the shaft to the bottom of the shaft. And it's very similar, I guess, to Tesla's drawings. I only had one intake and only one exhaust, which is, you can see up the top, there's 7 holes where the exhaust is coming out from. And it's actually quite heavy. There's 3 pins that are holding the 12 discs inside together. And it's probably close to half a pound, I'm thinking, the rotors together. And with
what are the discs made out of, Tom?
Oh, I also printed those, but just with PLA plastic. And PLA plastics actually has a pretty high tensile strength. So yeah, it's actually, this is way over engineered. This, I was planning on spinning, obviously, Keshe reactor cores, and yeah, this is, I could probably spin, I'm guessing, like a 50 millimeter diameter core, no problem, which I'm thinking I can get that up to 20,000 RPM with this system, and not having any vibration issues with the setup. So I'm gonna scale it down because, yeah, it's way too the torque on it's crazy. This, once it gets,
how many discs do you have again?
12, and they're
12.
they're 3 millimeters in thickness, and it's pretty tight for tolerances. There's only a 2 millimeter gap from the outer disc to the inside of the container wall. And basically how it works is the air pressure is creating a vortex, and the air is pushed around the disc, and it's tightening towards the center of the disc. And at the center of the disc, there's 3 gaps where it can travel up and escape out through the shaft, and then out through these top holes. And it takes a little bit to get going, but it's kind of cool. It just like slowly increases in speed. So my next setup is probably going to be half this size with twice as more discs, and
that'll give you more torque at the lower speeds, and but still be small and compact. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure what the PSI I'm using in this video. I'm guessing it was just out of a shop hose, and I'm guessing it was around somewhere around 60. And this got up to 10,000 RPM, no problem. And yeah, for sure, I'm guessing I could spin like an 80 millimeter diameter core with this. The power is pretty incredible. So,
yeah, the thing is, it usually doesn't have a lot of torque at the low RPMs. So if you want to run it at maybe 2,000 RPM, it might be a little trickier. But yeah, they tend to rev up. They like to run high revs in order to generate the torque. It's amazing.
So, yeah, I guess there's two sort of speeds that this thing runs on, and there's this I guess initial startup phase, and then what this design is actually meant to do is create a vacuum, and this is when this turbine actually kicks in. And I haven't hit it yet because there's a clear, distinct increase in speed, and it's almost like in a flash of a second, and you could jump from 50 to 70,000 RPM in a matter of like a second or two. So that was actually my intention, was to actually get a GANS ball spinning at least 50,000 RPM. I haven't seen it done yet, and I'm interested to see and feel the effects of it. So yeah, this one will be just a dust collector for the next little while. I don't have any use for this size, so smaller is usually the better. And my hope is a 20 millimeter core and another core around 40 millimeters diameter. And if I could get those up to 50,000, I would be very happy.
Yeah. Well, Tesla Turbine is in a way ideal, especially if I see you have ceramic bearings and you've got a glass, what do you call it? Quartz glass shaft.
Yeah.
And the parts inside are plastic. So you essentially don't have many metal parts. There's some metal screws on the top there, but even that could be replaced with
exactly
nylon or something. And the metal rods could be plastic. The whole thing could be non-metallic, which makes it very interesting, actually. And another aspect that there's no electrical wires attached to this whole unit. So you have a motor that can power a reactor that doesn't require the electrical apparatus around it, which could both interrupt with the flow of the plasma, or the flow of the plasma alternately can interrupt with the motors and cause issues with the control systems and that kind of thing.
All right. So I forgot to mention that, but that is exactly why I made this, because I wanted to feel what it's like to have no interference and no metal. So I am going to get, I'm guessing it's going to be nylon shafts and nylon screws. And the whole setup can be plastic. And that's exactly why the quartz shaft and the ceramic bearings. That part is sorry?
Sorry, go ahead. I have another idea that goes along with that, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm thinking also this can be both air powered and liquid driven. So
that's exactly what I was going to bring in. It could be water driven, for example, and instead of the water squirting out the holes in the top, if you just invert the whole apparatus, you could have it actually, the shaft can come out the other side and you dump the water out through the holes into a bucket essentially, and recirculate that water back into the pump, or back into the turbine again with the pump. And you could have a liquid system that would run very smoothly at the lower RPMs, because the water is very viscous and gives it good power at low RPMs. But I wouldn't probably like to go at 50,000 RPM so much on liquid.
Yeah,
that'd be hard, although it would be possible probably, but the forces on the the case and so on, you'd have to have high pressure to do that and so on.
Yeah. So it's it's a great design. It's pretty straightforward. This is like my first attempt, and it worked great. So
So were the discs quite smooth and shiny, or were they a bit lumpy and so on from the 3D printing, I'm wondering?
No, they are fairly smooth. The only surface finish is fairly noticeable lines just from the nozzle itself. But 3D printing has gone pretty precise. So the container itself was printed on a printer that runs for about $3,000, and its motors are a 16th inch step, and that equates to around I think it's like a 10 to a 15 micron accuracy. So you can get really accurate results with these systems. And I don't know if you could see it, but they're actually printed in a nut, and it fits perfectly. So the nuts don't turn. I could just screw in the.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And I didn't do it on this side because 3D printing, you have to be aware of how you're printing it. So I printed it from bottom to up, just being the top. But the bottom side, I completely enclosed the bearing, and you could just pause the print, pop in a bearing, and then print over it. So it's sealed.
Yep.
And
Wow.
So it's a pretty solid design, very simple. And
the other thing I was going to mention, that if you run this on water, it's a nice advantage having the ceramic bearings, which won't rust or corrode. And, the whole system lends well to the water environment too, with the plastic and so on. So you won't have any steel rusting or other issues with that.
Yeah, and also the bearings can handle those high speeds. So luckily I didn't seal this off, so actually the air will escape completely through this bearing even while it's spinning at high RPM.
Right. So it cools it as well.
Yeah.
Yep, amazing.
Plasma water or only water?
Well, that's the thing about it.
Water.
That's the thing about it. You could, that's the thing about it. You could run other kinds of water, plasma waters of various kinds. And that means the motor itself becomes part of the experiment as a benefit to the experiment. You could have the gradient between the motor and the reactor creating fields, for example. You can have that dynamic vortex system inside the turbine. Actually, it is its own magnetic gravitational environment inside the turbine. And if you really look into it, especially at high speeds, you've got an amazing gradient in there between, say, the velocity of the air or liquid going into this that's spinning when it goes in that inlet nozzle, and then spins around the outside of the disc and then works its way into the center. That's a big gradient as it slows down to go out through the center. And that gradient creates turbulence in there. It's actually shear layers, because there's laminar flow, what's called laminar flow between the layers. And the turbulence actually reduces down to almost zero, but there's a laminar flow. So between these laminations, there's an amazing gradient that can basically disintegrate particles. So if you were to have, say, polluted air going in, and at a high enough speed, it would actually disintegrate the particles and break it down into its basic components inside the turbine. And then you've got a soup of broken down components. And if the turbine's going fast enough, and it can actually produce what they call, what scientists call a plasma on the outer edges of the discs. And then you have a plasma environment with broken down particles. It's a soup of plasma that can be used in order to, if you consider the disks as a place where everything gets slowed down, it's like our atmospheric environment slows down the energy of the sun's rays and creates materials. Well, the same thing can be accomplished inside this turbine. You have the sun at the outer edges of the disks, and it slows down and coalesces the materials either on the discs or in the environment between the discs as it slows down and goes out the center. So it's to my mind that materials can be created inside of a Tesla turbine that is working in a plasmatic environment especially. You can at least do the breakdown of materials. For example, I'll give you an example that I did with my turbines, and I could actually show the video, but I won't bore you with that right now. But you can actually run air and water through this turbine at the same time. When you do that, the water stays around the outside of the discs and of the outside case of the turbine, and the air will go through the center and exit. And if you keep adding water to it and so on, it'll eventually work its way through to the center. But it takes, it wants to stay on the outside. So in effect, it's the vapor of the water that works its way toward the center much easier than the liquid itself. So you can actually run a turbine, not just as a turbine, but as a pump as well, and create the environment and the outside of the discs to essentially disintegrate material and then reintegrate it as it's blown out through the holes again. So there's a lot of possibilities in this tiny little device. Let's have a look at the running of this, which I've got set up here, and see what it sounds and looks like when it's running.
Outside.
Hello? What was that? Okay, so let me get that shared properly here. Let's see if I can do it this way. No, let's do it this way. And share sound, optimize, share. Yeah, just trying to get it. See if I can make it a little bigger. I think that's as big as it gets in this setup. Okay, I'm going to turn the sound down low because I know it's quite loud. It still might be loud. I'm not sure. You can let me know if it's too loud. But okay, 30 seconds. Here we go. I think it's all systems go. Let's to move it over a bit. There we go. And let me just get the live stream a little better for the focus here so people can see that better. There we go. Okay, here we go. Okay, that was it. So How much RPM do you think it was going there, Tommy?
At the very end, it was probably around 8,000 to 9,000. So it was getting pretty close to maxed out. It would reach 10,000 within a minute.
Yeah. Okay. Just so we're on this, I'm going to try to. I'm going to show my video of my Tesla turbine since we're on the subject here. If I can just find it. I've got a Tesla turbine playlist in my Mr. Fix-It Rick YouTube channel.
Was that the one you used actual CD ROMs?
Yes, that was my claim to fame, actually, is I invented a Tesla turbine with CDs as the discs, because I entered a contest one time for Instructables.com. They wanted to find good uses for CDs. I'm thinking, what can I do that with CDs? And then I was also studying the Tesla turbine that time, and I just happened to look at the patent drawing of Tesla's turbine, and then I'm thinking CDs and Tesla turbine and CDs, and I go, I'm going to build a Tesla turbine out of CDs. Why not? Can it be done? Can it really work? And then I even built them inside the CD case. So I used the CD case for the turbine, and I put magnets in between the discs, and that changed everything, and so on. So it's actually my
Advanced City.
It's actually one of my biggest claims to fame is my Tesla turbine, because I improved Tesla's design by removing the bearings and seals, so it doesn't need bearings and seals. And the shaft, I get rid of the shaft, the bearings and the seals, which are the main parts of the turbine. And was still able to get 20,000 RPM out of it here. Well, this is one of my videos here, so let's let me get that lined up here in just a second. Okay. Just get it lined up here in all of our favorite ways. What's going on here? Just a second. Sharing this. Share. Okay, I'm not sure why it's so wide today, but maybe it's just the way. Oh, there we go. It's better. Okay, this is the Tesla. I called it the Tesla Cd Turbine. That was my.
Rick, your desktop's all on show.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, right. Somehow it screwed up there. There we go. That's better. Thank you, Jay. All right, so this is called the Tesla Cd Turbine, and this is with the high-speed disk pack. This was the second version I built, I guess it was. And it's 3 minutes altogether. I'll probably skip through some of the parts here, but I just wanted to show you what a turbine made out of CDs can do. It's just, oh, wait a minute. I think this might have some music in the intro, so I have to be careful not to play that. Oh, it seems good. Okay, here's a shot of the new improved test facilities here at the secret installation in East Soup, BC, Canada. And look at the new remote shut-off valve. Zero in on that a little bit. That's much easier to keep your hands attached to your body when running high-speed tests on the Tesla Cd Turbine. And over here we have a great new tool, which is a digital tachometer, which will help us determine what the actual RPM is of the Tesla Cd Turbine, which we have an example of here. This particular turbine has no magnets, and I'm going to take it for a little test run. It has only CD discs, and that's it for the main disc pack. Think it'll work? Let's give it a try. Okay, this is a run with the CD disc pack with no magnets. Just a straight CD disc pack glued together with little grooves cut in between each disc on its own bump in the middle of the disc where the ring is. I cut through that in various places to allow the air to flow through the disc. Okay, let's give that a run. Get our tachometer ready here. $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000. We're up to 10,000, 11,000 RPM. Right there, folks. Almost at its time. Oh, look at that sucker go. Still spinning at 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 4, 3, 2, and 1, 7. Down to 0. Wow. So that's one of the many videos that I did with various incarnations of this CD turbine. Like there's one here, for example, that I'll just show you briefly. One of the crazy setups I did. Short this is unveil here. Back in the old days. Here. Now the fly. I unveil it. Yep. Oh, there we go. This is one I forgot about. I wanted to. This is kind of funny. So this might be worth watching because it shows what the Tesla turbine can do, but also it shows associated with which works with the turbine. This is my new pencil sharpener. It's going to be powered by this Tesla turbine in a CD jewel case. Think it can be done? I know it can. Let me show you first the pencil sharpener here. This is I made this case. It's polycarbonate. It is very strong. You could hammer on it. It won't break. Okay, we're going to try a little torture testing of the new polycarbonate box that I've made here. This is for testing turbines, and we have to make sure that it is strong. Feels pretty strong. Let's try it. Yep. By golly, that's pretty darn strong, I would say. Alright, torture test done. You could shoot it with a shotgun and it won't break, hopefully. Anyway, that's going to be our protective thing. This is a standard Chicago type pencil sharpener, but what isn't standard is I've adapted on a flywheel here. Now the flywheel's got 4 neodymium 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch magnets inserted into it, and it's got a little counterweight here as well to offset the handle and bolts that I bolted onto the handle of the pencil sharpener, and that goes around like that, sort of a flywheel effect. This is polycarbonate that I used as the flywheel. Now, what's really neat is this is the turbine, and what we're going to do is just plug the turbine right into place here, just like that. The magnets on the flywheel of the pencil sharpener engage the magnets on the turbine. You can see when I move the pencil sharpener, the turbine tends to go around. Okay, here's a close-up view of the business end of our Tesla Cd Turbine, made out of a CD jewel box here. Very thin, 2 CD discs inside, and I can remove this fairly easily, but not with one hand so easily. There we go. I'm going to move along. The back of it has a hole cut into the CD case, and you can see the 4 magnets in the clear discs that I have inside. And that just pops right into place there, very easily. So you can see the idea here is that there's no shaft or bearings. It's a magnetic drive, and it relies on the actual fluid coupling of the air as a bearing surface. So that's the whole idea here. No bearings, no. And that just pops right into place there, very easily. And we have a gap in between of about an 1/8 inch between the flywheel and the turbine itself, and everything's magnetically driven. When the flywheel goes around, the turbine goes around, and vice versa. So hopefully when we hook up air to this, we should get the turbine to go around. It should make the pencil sharpener go around. And that would make me happy if it all works. So let's give it a try. First I'll hook up the air supply. And okay, we're going to put this protective cover over this because we don't know what's going to happen here. Alright, here we go. Now I've also got a tachometer here, a digital tachometer, and we're going to set that up so we can watch the speed of the turbine as it goes around. And I think I'm going to get out of the direct line of fire, even though I know this bulletproof protective cover is going to work. But you never know what could happen. That's why I got my safety glasses on too. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's see if this sucker will work. I need to have a pencil. There's a pencil. Number 2 HB. Oh darn, I broke my pencil. Teacher, can I sharpen my pencil? Why sure, Mr. Student. Okay, let's go at her. Yippee! Up to 500, 600, 700 RPM, 800, 900, 1000, 1200. Okay, now we start pencil sharpening. That brings it down to 900. It's still hanging in there. We need to build up RPM. Let it build up again. 700, 800, 900. We're bogging down, but we're getting it sharpened. Way better. They're already up. Flywheel engaged magnetic, the pencil sharpener. Okay, let's get going here. See what we can do. I've got a new hose on. Hopefully it won't leak so badly. Oh yeah, the torque's way better. They're already up to 800, 1400, 1700, 1800, 19. She's got 2200 RPM. Fantastic. Let's get that pencil sharpened. Oh yeah. Instant pencil sharpening. Yes. Okay, well, I guess you get the drift there. That's one of the practical applications of the Tesla turbine.
That is great stuff, Rick. Thanks for doing that. Yeah, I can't believe you just threw it in just the container, and the container created everything it needed to make it happen. That's.
Yep, I had one turbine had 23 discs in it, and it was a big stacker inside of one of those CD cases that has a lot of CDs, and it had magnets between each of the layers of these 23 discs. And it had a lot of power at even at lower RPMs, but it still could rev up when necessary as well. And I ran it on faucet water pressure. And so I developed a whole system of science experiments using the faucet water pressure. I had a generator that would light up LED flashlight with the turbine, and since there's magnets rotating around, you can actually make a coil and hold it over the turbine, and it'll light a light just from the rotating magnetic field, and so on and on.
So if you do that, you could probably get greater output with the actual pressure from the faucet and the magnetic field from the magnet.
Well, the faucet just provides the energy to rotate the magnets on the discs, and then you can take that energy off the magnets using a coil or some method to interact with the magnets. I made a magnetic coupler that went on the outside of the turbine, and it rotated with the turbine. And so you could attach anything you want to the magnetic coupler, anything that rotates, that makes electricity or makes something go back and forth or up and down or whatever. So I made a bunch of experiments with funky little things to rotate and have fun with. I was doing mostly orientated to a kids audience at the time, but I was embedding into my simple experiments this idea of a magnetic turbine that has no shaft, no bearings, and no seals. And it is the generator and the turbine built into one. And in fact, you can make it into a motor instead of a turbine just by having an external motor with magnets on it that could rotate the turbine inside, and then you have a pump. You can use it to pump water or pump air instead of being a motor. And that's the great thing about the Tesla turbine, his original patent. You could have it as a motor or a pump, and it was efficient both ways. And it could rotate in either direction as well, which was unheard of at the time. A turbine that's reversible at full speed. You can't do that with a normal turbine without totally destroying it. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool things about the Tesla turbine. And also, when you think about the possibilities of it in terms of the plasma technology, that's where it gets truly interesting and truly it could have some very phenomenal practical applications. I kind of gave up on the Tesla turbine because when I became involved with the Keshe technology and looking at the Keshe patent and so on, I realized that the plasma technology was way beyond the physicality stuff like the Tesla turbine was normally thought of. But later in my education, I see now that the Tesla turbine, even in its physicality, can create a plasmatic environment inside, and through that environment could lead to creation of materials, transmutation of materials, creation of energy, and possibly even lift from the from that high-speed vortex of fields that are going on in the turbine, and depending on the fluids as well. For example, if you used salt water instead of fresh water, you've now made a high-speed electrical circuit that you could actually start to direct the flow with magnetic fields and that kind of thing. So it's very interesting stuff once you get into it.
Yeah, it was mentioned, I think it was 4 public workshops ago, with Armen showing his blender, his bullet, that he would blend up the GANs and activate and homogenize the fields with, and this system actually kind of does it all in one.
Yes, exactly. Good point. And yeah, because if you think about the flow of the Tesla turbine, let's just do a whiteboard quickly here and explain what I mean.
I actually downloaded the screenshot of my 3D file. I don't know if you want to write over that one or not.
Well, first we could have a look at that. I'd like to look at that, but first I just want to look. Oh, that's not a very good circle. Let me try the circle tool. Maybe it'll be better for me. There, that's a better circle. And so if you look at the disk of a Tesla turbine, you actually got another circle, a hole in the middle, let's say, something like that, or you could have several holes depending. And essentially the fluid, when it gets directed in, whoops, let's try that differently here, back to drawing. So you have a nozzle that comes in and directs the flow of this fluid, which could be liquid or air-based, and it comes through here in a high speed and travels around the disk. So the outer edge is first and works its way gradually toward the center and then exits out the center exhaust of the turbine. So while the fluid travels over the disk of the turbine, by adhesion, it imparts its energy to the turbine disk and therefore to the shaft or to the magnets of the turbine or whatever you use. But it gives it its speed and its torque. So when you think about it, the particles that come through here have to travel actually quite a long distance. And that distance can be like up to, depending on the turbine and the materials, it might be a couple of meters. So essentially you have a slowdown at the start here, you have a very high speed, and it slows down, then you have the lowest speed going out the exit. So you have a gradient on this 2-meter strip, and you can have the particles slow down or interact with different parts of this strip. For example, what if this was nano-coated copper, this disc? And what if this material was some sort of GANs or some other activated plasmatic material that was flowing over this 2-meter distance? And what if only at a certain point here, when the velocity was just right and the spacing was just right, at this point of that 2 meters, that's when some sort of magical effect takes place, a transmutation, maybe with an isotope or some other effect that takes place with the actual interaction on that part of this transition. So it could be that that part of the disk could collect certain particles, or it could be that a transformation occurs in that part of the disk and they still get spit out through the center, but as transmutated elements rather than the original. And, or, you know, there's other ways to look at it, picking up energy in the disk itself that can be imparted in other ways as well. Perhaps there could be heating or friction that might be involved, or other types of field effects of these particles moving through. There's so many different variables with this setup that it's actually pretty mind-boggling as to the capabilities, especially when you consider, like I mentioned before, if your case around the turbines like this, for example, and those disks are inside, then you have this area in between the disks and the case of the turbine that if this is turned into a plasmatic environment, like an actual high voltage type plasma or high energy situation, which it can very well be, just imparting a high speed liquid into an environment like this will start to cause implosion and other types of effects that, if you look at implosion, bubbles and implosion happening in this space, it is capable of breaking down practically any matter that we know of into its component parts. So you could have polluted water in this environment, polluted air, or other types of materials that end up in this environment and get cleansed as they travel both between the walls of this turbine and the discs and over the discs themselves. And plus, if you have nano-coated copper discs, for example, it is a natural microside, and that environment, because if you look at it sideways, you have a disc here. Whoops. Yeah, let's just make it this way. You have a disc here, you have a disc here, and so on, many discs. And in between each disc is a very narrow space, probably somewhere around maybe 30 thousandths of an inch or something like that. And that space, because the liquid or gas is being injected in between there, forced to go in, it's now between two nano-coated surfaces, and it travels, instead of just along the edge, you actually have two, well, more, but if you look between each disc, that forces the fluid in between these discs for a 2 meter length. And that 2 meters is enough to pull out maybe heavy metals or other undesirable things that could be transformed by the nano-coated copper surface, which is known for, copper is the first material the US EPA has ever certified to be a microside. It kills bacteria and viruses, usually within minutes or up to hours, depending on the application. But it could be that just the simple transformation along this distance could be enough to make a major change in that material. So something else to think about inside this miraculous little machine that Tesla initially conceived of many, many years ago. And he thought it was, in fact, he brought out a 200 horsepower Tesla turbine on his 50th birthday and said this was his greatest invention, he thought of. Tesla had over 600 inventions, and he thought his turbine was the greatest of them all and was going to make the biggest changes in the world. But unfortunately, the turbine builders at that time had other thoughts, and the other types of turbines got all the research monies and the attention of the banks and the banking cartels, who more or less banned Tesla at the time. And he didn't get the financing or approval of the industrialists for his Tesla turbine. And some of the materials they had at that time weren't up to snuff for the testing and so on as well. And so it kind of fell into disrepute as not being useful enough. But actually the first, I believe it's the first turbines they had in Niagara Falls where they first developed hydroelectric power were actually the Tesla turbine. So I think they're actually still working too, because it's such a simple design, it doesn't tend to fail compared to normal turbines. But of course, since it doesn't fail, then you don't get to replace it like normal turbines. And since our industrialist capitalist society is built on failure, you must have things fail in order to be successful in your business. If you had cars that did not fail, then you would not be building cars the next year because people would not be buying new cars. And so they were deliberately designed to fail in order so that people would buy new cars, of course. And that same philosophy goes with all of the industrial, right down to the pharmaceutical companies, which is the products are not designed to improve your health. They're designed to have repeat customers. And that's the most important thing for pharmaceutical companies is repeat customers and not your personal health. So they will develop products that are designed to make sure that you keep using the product. Whether it works or not is irrelevant to them as long as the money is made. In fact, they recently declared to the shareholders that the business model of healing is not a business model that they will ever use in the pharmaceutical companies. They refuse to even engage in a business model that is for the personal health of people, because that means they won't get repeat customers. So they do not want to have cures. Cures are not part of the equation. Relief, temporary relief, yes. Cures, no. That's why the cure for cancer, it's illegal to call anything a cure for cancer. Anyway, I didn't mean to get on that sidetrack, but it's one of my favorites. Anyway, Tesla turbine, any questions or comments at this point? Shall we move on to something else?
Yeah, hello, good morning. My name is Lawrence from Hungary. I wanted to suggest the idea that instead of air or water that drives this Tesla turbine, if we consider light, a ray of light as the driving motor, and instead of the blades, we consider plasmatic fields, then we basically have the structure of plasma.
A ray of light and plasmatic fields, the interaction of a ray of light and plasmatic fields you're talking about, right?
I'm talking about in this Tesla turbine, you have water or air as the engine that drives the blades, the turbine blades, as far as I understand.
Through adhesion is the idea. And
Yes.
Tesla was actually very specific that it's not friction, but adhesion of the materials. And that's what makes it so efficient. If it was friction, then there'd be losses involved. But because it's adhesion, then it's almost a perfect process. And in a good Tesla turbine, it could be up to 99% efficient and even over unity in some instances, he claimed.
Yeah. So the idea was just a game of thought to replace water or air as a physical medium with what we're dealing with here in our plasmatic realms. And it's a ray of light as a source of energy input. It's the light of the creator that shines. And as it shines, it moves those plasmatic fields around itself that we then use in different aspects.
The light moves the plasmatic fields. I'm trying to think.
Consider the water and the air as a beam of light, and what you have around, wrapped around that ray of light, are the different plasmatic fields, just like the turbine blades. You could reconfigure this Tesla turbine to use different size of blades and with the airflow slits aligned one opposite with the other, create counter-rotating blades, just as a, you know, game of thoughts. And then we would have the exact setup as we have in the different demonstrations or animations about plasma technology, where you have one magnetic field rotating in one side, then the gravitational on the other side, then another magnetic, then a gravitational. You understand? The counter-rotating magnetic field. You could emulate this with this Tesla turbine as well, if you use different slits, different directional slits for the airflow.
Okay, that's another idea.
And if you have different sizes of blades, different sizes of CD disks, then you would have different rotational speeds. Agree?
Well, yes, you have different speeds according to the radius. If you have a certain input pressure coming in here, for example, and yes, then your radius is your, will determine your torque. Yes. Essentially, that's going on there.
And in plasmatic terms, you remember this workshop where Mr. Keshe explained about the different metals and the plasmatic field strength difference of these metals with the nano copper creating this 6-to-1 reactor, where the 6 was the carbon field strength in the center, the 1 was the hydrogen field strength at the outer skirts, and then the 2 and 3 would be created automatically as a interaction between the 6 and 1, and they would be counter-rotating with each other. These different size blades with different rotational speeds could be thought of as an example of how different plasmatic field strengths interact with each other. You know, we have the stronger fields in the center. They are the smaller blades, if you want it in physical term, because they have a much higher rotational speed. And then we have the slower blades at the outer skirts, which are the lower strength plasmatic fields. It's the do you get what I mean?
Yes, it's an interesting idea. I mean, that's what if you look at the drawing here, if I was to say change the color and let's go with a different line width. I mean, this is basically the age-old drawing that Mr. Keshe makes of this spiral. And you can look at that any which way you want in terms of, that's the way I look at this in terms of the, what I was describing with this thing along the bottom here. And when you take this whole spiral and lay it out like a straight line, then you have different points on this line where different effects can take place.
Yes, that spiral laid out as a line is the ray of the creator, the ray of light. The gravitational source of the whole universe is the creator. That's where everything comes out from and gets back into. And so basically that ray of light is constantly feeding itself. And if you replace the water and air in the Tesla turbine with this ray of light of the creator feeding itself, you have an endless source which never runs out. So
well, that's an interesting idea.
That's the feeding source of the plasma that we are working with and that we're tapping into when creating the right conditions, in my understanding. And this is why the plasma never runs out.
Why it never runs out, yes. Well, okay.
I have actually one more thing to share.
Okay, great.
Give me another minute though. It's interesting type of GANs, I think, and amino acids combined. And I know you've been around the Foundation for so long. Have you ever heard of such a thing happening, combining the actual two together?
The GANs and amino acid?
Yeah, when I look at it, that's what I am perceiving it. And I have to ask Mr. Keshe about it because, yeah, I haven't seen it anywhere on online or in anyone else's experiments.
Well, he does talk about combining the GANs and amino acids for certain conditions, for certain uses.
Yeah, but actually having it sort of all tied in together, like homogenized.
You do that after it's created, you mean? Or during the creation process, that's what happens?
It was kind of a fluke, but yeah, during the creation process.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what process you use, so we'd have to look at that, I guess.
You're not going to believe it, but it's honestly just a stainless steel pot.
Stainless steel and...
That's it.
How did you create a gradient, or just stainless steel and water?
It was actually the rivets inside the stainless steel pot. So just 1 second, I'll show you the picture, and it's
Okay.
very, very clear. But,
Right. Trying to find the video. Is it? There it is. Okay, let me play the little plasma animation video that we have from the Keshe Foundation that we several of us contributed to in concept, and share it here. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. This is what I call the full-length version, where I've extended it out from its short version and made it slower. So these are the rays, call them magnetic rays, that I think this is what Lawrence is referring to as the original ray that would come from the source. And then we have this interaction occurs where the rays interact with each other and form the plasma. And then the plasma, as it forms, has its own magnetic fields that is created by this, essentially a little sun. That's the wrapped up fields of the rays. Okay, did you find your thing yet there, Thomas?
sorry, I'm just uploading it to cloud, and then I'll
Okay.
do it just for another couple minutes.
All right, thanks. Great. So I just play that over again so that people can have something to look at here. Just trying to look at the chat here. Haven't been following lately, so. Peter mentions theoretically with an electrode and the frequency of gold, you can manifest gold out of rivers without digging. Anyway, JS, another question. Have you ever heard that two tuning forks facing each other would keep vibrating forever? No, I haven't heard that. They would have to have some source of vibration, I would think. Maybe there's just the ethers is enough to vibrate it or something. I have no idea. Okay, okay. And okay. And I haven't noticed. You sent Alice Plasma Lab. Okay. Sent a mail to the webmaster of the KFSSI site. Please check it out. Okay, I'll check that out and I get it from the webmaster. Thank you. Okay. Are we there yet?
Sure, I'm just having an issue with Google Drive, and I'll just go straight from Google Drive then.
I've always had an issue with Google Drive.
Alrighty, I am ready.
Somebody mentions adding carbon C60 buckyballs to the water. I'm not sure what that would do. Or you might be able to trap harmful elements in the buckyballs, putting them in water, especially if the Tesla turbine and the turbulence and gradient inside the turbine might be ideal actually with that to trap harmful pollutants inside the C60 buckyballs. Okay, let's have a look here.
Already.
So,
can you see that?
Do we see what's the white stuff at the top there?
All right. So that is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
This is okay. So there's the expanded view. This was completely by accident, but I have produced these formations in some of my CO2 kits, and I was using 1 kilo zinc bars that were 0.999% pure with around 11 volts with ocean water. And I also infused CO2 in that ocean water with one of those drink makers. You could add CO2 to the water. So I had a really high yield out of that setup. And in that setup, around the zinc bars, I was getting these blobs. And if you were to touch these, it's like a really thick gelatinous material. But it just so happened that the water level was directly in line with these rivets. And this one was by fluke. I just had some ocean water sitting in a stainless steel pot. And the stainless steel is a nanomaterial, clearly. Clearly there's fields being bounced all around here. And these rivets had these globs. And these globs had GANs dripping down. I don't know if you could see that. There's like a little trail coming down from them.
Yeah, well, the rivets will be a slightly different material than the stainless steel, probably.
Yes, yes.
Were they rusty at all, or were they still looking like stainless?
They were stainless, but eventually behind the rivets, the steel wasn't stainless, and it did rust. It did rust eventually, but right here was not rusting, and this is after 2 months.
Mm-hmm. So you've got a pretty high concentration of salt in there, or is it sea salt water? Like,
oh, that's straight ocean water from your neck of the woods.
Right. So you've got all kinds of substances inside the ocean water, of course. And what you also have with rivets in there, the rivets will be, like I say, a slightly different composition, or maybe they're aluminum or steel, or, plain steel, not stainless steel or something like that. If they're rusting, then they must be a type of plain steel rather than the stainless, perhaps. And what can happen is then you'll set up a slight voltage difference. There'll be a gradient there between the rivet and the pod itself, and that can create, field effects that can start converting things.
Sure, but I haven't seen these before, except actually on one photo from Mark House's setups. He had really small amino blobs in his zero boost, and it was a very similar setup where he had just his galvanized pail, and he had his copper scrubbies inside. And I looked at some of his photos, and there were small little round balls like this, but most of the amino acids we see in our kits are a light sheen on the top.
Yeah,
and these globs sink immediately down when you put them in water. I've been drinking water daily with these amino acids, and I've understood now that there is actually GANs in the mix with this, because it's basically the cup of life. I put a piece of apple above the container with this, and it transfers all the energy through, and it's just this amino acid. There's no GANs inside of it. It's just this, and it literally satisfies my my hunger. And I went 2 weeks just drinking this charged water from these amino acids alone.
What is the leaf doing in there? Is that a leaf?
Yeah, and I'm thinking that also had some effect in it. But yeah, I just cleaned out an old container, and one leaf got into it. But this is a close-up of the aminos.
So this was created without electricity. This was just sitting in the
stainless steel pot. Yeah. But I did make this not to this size, though. This is rather large. This is about that one blob is about the size of a penny, and I was getting a little bit like of the smaller pieces here in my my CO2 kits when I infused that water, and I was using ocean water with like a heavy chunk of zinc, and those pictures are elsewhere. But yeah, I'm thinking that they are, because it's clear for the most part, and you could see it certain, like one half of it will be clear, and then the other half you'll see like a trail of like this really light white, like zinc and a white. So I think it actually traps some of the GANs inside of it. So it's kind of got all these fields present within it, and it's kind of just perfect for feeding. Like you literally pour water in your container, these sink right down, and your water's charged almost instantaneously. Usually you have to wait like a day for the GANs to settle, but this is, you can keep refilling it almost immediately after they sink right away.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck that would be. I would be leery of drinking it myself, but you seem to have survived quite well with it, so.
Oh, it's a wonderful energy, and you could see it actually made a fair bit of CO2 as well on the bottom here.
So to be clear, did you drink the water that was sitting in this stainless pot that had been sitting in there for some time? Is that the idea, or was that from the other experiments you were doing with your zinc bar and so on you're talking about?
No, I was just taking these aminos and, you know, doing the standard process, distilling it or cleansing it, you know, rinse it like 10 times. And then after rinsing it, I would put these in my drinking water. And yeah, as soon as this touches the drinking water, it's instantly plasmified. But I just recently discovered that this really can transfer the full sort of, maybe not the full range, but it definitely transfers a lot of the fields from fruits by just placing it on top of the container or around it.
Did you have other containers around this one when it was sitting around, or was it off on its own kind of?
Well, I guess for the most part, it was off on its own, but I've got GANs all over my house, so it's really relative. You know, the fields are, yeah, it's hard to get a clear environment in a house where I've got, I don't know, probably 100 liters of it all around. But yeah, it was an interesting surprise just to have it spontaneously happen, and it just yeah, it's honestly a great blessing. I'm trying to actually replicate this again in a more closed environment with galvanized or stainless steel, again, pots, just like this setup, and see what else I can produce. I'm hoping to produce more of this.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, though. It could be some life form that's just created from the air and interaction with the environment and so on. I don't know. Yeah,
I was wondering if anyone's seen anything similar to this, and the only picture I've ever seen similar was from Mars, but I guess the man asked is Mr. Keshe.
Yeah, well, he may or may not know either, because I don't think he uses stainless steel he never uses seawater, never uses stainless steel, so he may not know. fact, he recommends not to use seawater most of the time because it has so many different things in it that literally things. If you look at the analysis of seawater, every drop has something like 10,000 kinds of bacteria in it alone, let alone the numbers of bacteria, which are quite extreme, but there's thousands of different variations in every drop. So who knows what kind of life forms, what kind of amino acids might be created out of salt water, but that goes too with our other salt that we use to dissolve in water as well. There could be other things in the salt besides salt.
Rick, would you mind taking a look at the isotopes of the different elements that we use in the nano coating process?
Okay, you want to take a look at the isotopes of copper? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, but not only copper, because in the nano coating box, we also have the galvanized iron, we have the box itself, we have the alkali metals, the sodium, we have the different elements in the air. So there are lots and lots of elements.
Yeah, so there's like, 200 isotopes or something. What do you want to look at specifically about that?
I wanted to raise the idea because now we've been talking about, say, an episode of contamination of the GAN's production process. And I wanted to highlight that the plasmatic fields that we are creating within the layers of the nanocopper consists of multiple plasmatic strengths. The reason why we experience the nanocopper as a plasmatic field strength of 59 is because we have the copper as matter as a filter, like this drum analogy that Mr. Keshe used last time when someone asked about putting a zinc plate around the reactor and then having an amplified zinc field. But in between the nano layers, those free plasmas that we have consists of many, many combinations of plasmatic field strengths. And even us, with our thoughts through the zinc that's in the galvanized iron in the nano coating box, have an influence of what quality of free plasma is within the nano layers. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So up until now, we've been thinking about things in a simplistic way, in a quite sterile kind of thinking. But in fact, the reason why I think the nano coating works and has an effect is because we have the basic plasmatic field strength, the basic strongest gravitational field strength of the free neutron as interaction, or due to the interaction of the free plasmas within the nano layers. And this is why Mr. Keshe calls the nano-coated environment the gravitational baseline, because there we are closer to the gravitational strength of that ray of light that's constantly feeding the free plasmas within the nano layers. And then we have, due to the way we created the nano layers, interactions between the matters that we then use for the creation of gases. Because due to the affinity of the free plasma with the galvanized iron, which is the zinc and the iron, we have the interaction that then creates the CO2. If we, I don't know, we could take a look, but I think what's inside the free plasma within the nano layers will determine or will have an effect on what kind of interaction the nano layers will want to get involved with. And this is why also the surroundings need always to be taken into account, because if we have a cat or some kind of plant or any other thing or living being that's made of gases, it will have an effect on firstly the nanolayers and then the gases that we produce with the help of those nanolayers, because the free plasma will store everything that's in the environment.
Okay, that's a good point.
And there's been in the chat that if we spit on the things, we put some of our own aminos inside the system, it's enough to think on the system or pray to the system. We already put through our emotions our whole being as a fingerprint into the system. I even think that the limits of effectiveness of these systems is in part of how much we gave from our souls so that these systems work. If we are selfish and we want to have a system that works only for us, or which works supposedly for our own benefit, it will be much less effective than if we give it to someone else, because of the basic plasmatic principles of give to receive. And I wanted to make I will create a matrix of these different isotopes that we use in the nano coating box, and cross-reference them with the difference of plasmatic field strengths that they have. Basically, it's not only the nano copper that we create in that in the coating box, but all the other elements, even the box itself gets into a nano state. It certainly has a different strengths, but it's still interacting when creating the free plasmas. I usually use the IAEA live chart for this isotope search thing. International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA live chart. That's what I usually
Is
search
it copyright free? I'm not sure if it's copyright.
I don't know. IAEA is supposedly an international organization in the benefit of all, but I don't know if it's copyright free or not.
Well, that's the thing. I can't show things that are copyright until I know that they are copyright free in order to show them. Otherwise,
we can also go the Wikipedia route and just check what stable isotopes of each element exist and in what ratio they are in that particular element. Because if we say we have 100% pure copper, then most probably it's made up of copper. I tell you right now.
It's two
copper
isotopes.
63 and copper 65, and in the ratio of 2/3 of 63 and 1/3 of or 30% of 65. So that's what we call pure copper. It's a mix of two isotopes, and those isotopes have a plasmatic or a neutron difference of 2.
Right.
Or no, exactly. Yes, 2. 34 and 36. And even with the other elements that we use in the nano coating, we have similar things. With the iron, we have 4 stable isotopes in different ratios. With the zinc, we have also 4 different stable isotopes. So it's always a mix of these different elements that we're using, and we can never be exactly sure what we're working with. The numbers are, say, for learning. So
yeah, and it's interesting that like even with the copper, for example, there's isotopes of copper that only last for nanoseconds. They have a half-life of nanoseconds before they decay and become a different substance, essentially. And we can see that the isotopes of copper, for example, when they decay, they become essentially a nickel.
Yes, these have to be taken into account too. And then the other question is, why don't those nano layers collapse back on themselves to form matter again, just like they used to when we started the process? And this is why I brought up this ray of light and the Tesla turbine concept, that the free plasma that's created within the layers, each of those free plasmas is feeding the nano layers to have that energetic state, the positioning that they maintain. And the reason why we get millivolts out of squeezing or touching the nano layers is exactly because of the disturbance of the fields that's created when we're moving some of the metal layers. And the repositioning has the effect of, like, creating light at the higher strength. Here we're creating electrons. It's the energy that's not needed, that's released by touching the nano layers. And so what I wanted to say is that the first experiment that we've been taught how to do the nano coating is basically already containing all the know-how that we need to become good plasma masters. I mean, like creating out of those free plasmas that are within the nano layers, we can then create the free plasma that's within the different coils of the Magrav unit.
Yes, right. You can see all the isotopes of copper here. It goes from 52 all the way up to 80. And when they decay, some of them form nickel and some of them form zinc, which is interesting. So that would be on either side of the copper element on the periodic table.
Yeah, now take a look at the same for zinc, for the same for iron, for the same of the sodium, for the same of oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and what else do we have? Basically, these are the main ingredients. Even the plastic is made of things like the amino acids, it's carbon.
And zinc, for example, has 5 stable isotopes compared to the 2 of copper. And zinc 64 being the most abundant. And interesting. Zinc has been proposed as a salting material for nuclear weapons. A jacket of isotopically enriched 64 zinc irradiated by the intense high-energy neutron flux from an exploding thermonuclear weapon would transmute into the radioactive isotope 65 zinc with a half-life of 244 days and produce approximately 1.115 mega electron volts of gamma radiation, significantly increasing the radioactivity of the weapon's fallout for several days. Such a weapon is not known to have ever been built, tested, or used. Well, that's interesting, though. What if instead of a weapon, this was transmuted into something that could be giving off energy and using that energy for days rather than a weapon? I wonder. That's interesting. Basically, the zinc irradiated by the neutron flux. So the energy of the neutron can change the regular 64 zinc, being the most abundant, to the radioactive zinc 65?
Well, I wouldn't go into this matter level radioactivity thing. I would just think in terms of plasma. And we know that when we have nano and matter, then the interaction of the difference of the two creates a certain plasmatic field strength. And the thing, this is what I've been explaining last time as well, that when we're considering isotopes, not only the matters themselves, then we always, whenever we did the first nanocoating, already created the plasmatic field strength of the neutron and the deuterium and the tritium due to the isotope neutron level difference between the different isotopes and different matters and their cascading when changing structure. And the reason why we get with the nanocoating copper the plasmatic field strength of 59 is because we have, just like with the zinc drum in the last teaching's explanation, we have a copper drum around the free plasma. So when the coppers move, create space due to the nanocoating, they create a little vacuum within the atoms, within the lattice structure. And within that little space, that's the free plasma container that we're working with. And the free plasma in that container contains many, many, many fields of the different elements that are in the vicinity when creating the free plasma.
Sure, yep, that makes sense.
And each of these free plasmas already has the strength of the neutron due to the isotope strength difference of the elements that are used. So this is the source of energy that we're transforming then into ganses by peeling off the containing copper strength around the free plasma. So whenever we're creating the ganses, we have the free plasma in the center, we have the drum of the copper around, that's what we call the nanocoating. And then due to the interaction of the plasmatic zinc, for example, in that free plasma within the copper, with the outside zinc in the matter configuration with the other plate and the GANS kit, through the interaction in the middle or somewhere in the middle, we have another free plasma being created in the salt solution that we then call the CO2 plasma. And it's always that free plasma as the initial energy source within the nano-layers that we transform with creating another environment. You get what I mean? So we're basically peeling off, or we are using one disk of the Tesla turbine to appear as, for example, CO2 gas. We're using that field strength that's already implanted in that free plasma to interact with the matter and then create the GANs out of it, which is again a form of free plasma contained. But whereas in the nano-layering, we had a copper strength containment. In the CO2, we have the carbon and oxygen containment, even though it's a little strange to think of 3 elements. I mean, like 6 and 16, if we consider the CO2.
Okay, I think I understood most of that, but I could be wrong. It's hard to follow sometimes with the words, but I think I got the meaning.
Please ask if you feel.
Well, the main thing seems to be the interaction of the isotopes producing all these different fields within the layers of the nanocoating, and that can relay to other effects and so on. So that definitely makes sense.
Thank you for listening.
And that was important what you mentioned about this vacuum, which is in between the layers and in between the elements of the nano coating, let's say. Because that vacuum condition is where all the fields, where all the action takes place. It has to be a vacuum condition in order for the fields to interact well, to interact basically.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought this up is because we always have this SP2 and SP3, this thing that we can test with the diamond tester. And Mr. Keshe explained that the fields of deuterium, so the field strengths of 2, links up, 3 of those link up to create the field strengths of carbon. And I think due to the isotope difference of the copper, which is 2 of the main stable isotopes of the copper, which is the 63 and 65, we have this plasmatic field strengths of 2. And because this is one of the main components, these deuterium strengths, plasmatic field strengths, link up to create coppers as tested by the diamond tester. And this is where we then have the appearance, well, or which is the source of the appearance of diamond structures. Because the diamond tester, as far as I understand, works on a material plane. So on the outskirts of that nano layering, the fields behave as matters, like our skin.
Okay, yeah.
And those
go ahead.
And those 2s and the 6s, so basically the plasmatic fields themselves link up with each other as well, and they create lower strength fields and higher strength fields too. So this is when we are, so in the last few teachings when we were taught how to create the tritium, deuterium, and the neutron out of the CH3, we basically first extracted the carbon strength plasmatic field from the CH3, and then we were left with the H3. And then when we had the H3, once in one of the teachings, Mr. Keshe said, put 3 balls of H3 next to each other and see what's going to happen. And he said one of the balls will turn color and become deuterium. So basically they will separate themselves into different plasmatic field strengths, or create a balanced field with each other, the usual star formation. So I think in the nano layers themselves, we are also creating this neutron strengths, and that's the source of the energy of the nano layers. This is the whole point I wanted to make, that well, with the first nano coating, we already been in the plasma business. I may be wrong. There's no one to say, because we don't have Armen with us, we don't have Mr. Keshe with us, but that's my line of thought that I wanted to share to inspire others.
Sorry, that there's plasma between the nano layers. Is that what the main point is again?
Yes. And the composition of that plasma contains the plasmatic field strengths of the neutron too.
Right. Well,
yeah, Rick.
Go ahead, Mario. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, there's a workshop specifically about atomic structures. It's in the 7th Health Workshop. It's called Dr. Elliott chose the subject. It's called The Poetry of the Periodic Table of Elements. You all really need to go back and review this because Mr. Keshe really goes into pretty good explanation about what the atomic structure really is. He doesn't use those terms, electrons, protons, and neutrons. And if you go back to that teaching, you see what he said there. And then you go back to the second kids workshop where Mr. Keshe takes a bundle of wires, coils it up, sticks it into a plastic ball, holds it up and says, this is what everything in the universe is made out of. It's called a plasma, right? And he says you have millions of these in your little finger and so on. Really think that if you have seen it, you need to go back to what Mr. Keshe said. Go back to the teachings and look at what he says there before speculating on the other things. Whoever was speaking before, you're right, but there's something you're missing, and it's in those teachings. There's also another kids workshop, but I can't remember exactly which one. I think it's the 22nd or 24th, but there are transcripts, so you can search this. Kevin Devaney asked Mr. Keshe to give a definition of the word plasma, Keshe plasma, because if you ask 10 different people, you will get 10 different answers. And so everybody's got their own definition of the word plasma, and there's all this confusion about it. And so Kevin asked Mr. Keshe to define it once and for all, a definition that you can take to the bank. And Mr. Keshe said, oh, that's easy. Plasma is a fancy word for maggrav fields in a container. Now, if you look at the second kids workshop, that's exactly what he showed right there. Maggrav fields in a container. The fields are represented by the wires, and the plastic ball is the container, right? If you go to April of 2014, there's one of the most important workshops Mr. Keshe has ever given. In fact, it's the only time Mr. Keshe ever said, this subject is so important, every knowledge seeker needs to understand it. He said, if you understand this, you understand the essence of the creation and the basis of spaceship technology. And it was a subject brought up by the presenter Nicholas Chua about the flower of life in 7 musical tones. And then there's a follow-up I did in May, where Mr. Keshe, showed me how to draw a Coulomb barrier. And where the Coulomb barrier is the soul. It's where the fields go in. You look at that video we saw with the two rays. Those should be curved in their trajectory. And they're crossing and they're poking a hole in the universe like water going down a drain. And what that's coming out of there is the difference between the mass that's going in and the mass that's both the energy fields going in and then and splashing back and pooling around. Mr. Keshe explained this in that 2014, April of 2014 and May of 2014. You can find these very easily. You know, the Keshe Foundation logo is a flower of life, right? And
hello, we lost
Hello,
you.
are you still there, Mario? We lost you there.
Oh, okay. My internet connection. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, yeah. I don't know what you missed there.
Just the last sentence or two.
Okay, the Keshe Foundation logo is based on the flower of life in 7 musical tones. This is one subject. Mr. Keshe is the only time Mr. Keshe has actually said, this is so important, every knowledge seeker needs to understand this. When Nicholas brought it up, Mr. Keshe canceled all the other presenters, said, we're going to stay here all day until we understand this. Said, we'll come back next week. He actually flew the guy in to Italy to do a presentation on it. And yet I'll bet not one of you realize anything about what Mr. Keshe said there. And so all of this stuff, and it gets dismissed out of hand. I mean, I've been told for years now, like a few weeks ago, Jalal told me that the flower of life doesn't have anything to do with the universal condition. That is not from Mr. Keshe's teaching. And you guys missing that teaching, is important. You all really need to understand that, because I'm hearing you guys speculate about stuff when Mr. Keshe has actually said this so many times. He's already taught everything we need to understand. And you need to go back to the teachings. You need to go to the second kids workshop. You need to go to the 24th kids workshop. You need to go to the 7th health workshop. And you definitely need to go to the April 24th. I don't remember the name of the Knowledge Seeker number of this Knowledge Seekers workshop, but it's in April of 2014 and May of 2014. It's easy enough to find. And you will see Mr. Keshe showing me the essence of the creation and the basis of spaceship technology. He called it a tool the man from space uses to navigate the universe. Okay? And you guys are not aware of that teaching. And in fact, every time I bring up, I've done 30,000 hours at least of research on Mr. Keshe's teachings. And since then, that was 4.5 years ago, I have brought up every time the essence of the creation, the basis of spaceship technology, and the true meaning and understanding of transmutation of elements. And every time I bring it up, it gets dismissed out of hand, specifically because I'm basing it on the flower of life and 7 musical tones. I get told it's not Mr. Keshe's teaching, it's a theory of mine, or that it's not about plasma, it's about matter, or Jalal had a new one that's only about the earth condition and not the universal condition. Never heard that one before. You see what's going on here? There's something ironic happening here, that you guys are avoiding the single most important subject Mr. Keshe has ever talked about as a single thing. He's never said every knowledge seeker needs to understand how to make a Magrath power coil. He's never said every knowledge seeker needs to know how to make a pain pen. If you understand how to make a pain pen, you understand how the essence of creation and basis of spaceship technology. In fact, he's always said these tools are just to get man to understand and get confidence to understand the essence of the creation and the basis of spaceship technology. That if you actually understand the totality of that, you don't need any of those tools. And the one teaching that he really said everyone needs to understand is the flower of life and 7 musical tones. And not only has none of you gone back to it, even though I bring that up every time I mention Nicholas Chua's name, every time I've mentioned the 7th health workshop, I've mentioned the 2nd kids workshop again and again and again, and no one goes back and everybody dismisses it out of hand. And I just wonder.
Well, the thing is, Mario, Mr. Keshe has never mentioned the flower of life in the last 5 years of teachings.
No, you know why? Because he stopped me. If you remember, he stopped me in the middle of the presentation because I touched on something I wasn't supposed to touch on. It was not the right time for it. It was too soon for it. So, okay, I thought 6 months later, it's not the right time. A year later, not the right time. But here we are, 4.5 years later. Are none of you going to go back to the teachings? Yeah? It is the Keshe Foundation logo is the flower of life. So, yes, I know Mr. Keshe has not brought it up. Maybe I'm not supposed to do it again. Maybe when Mr. Keshe told me I touched on something I was not supposed to touch on, I was hitting on the soul of the flower of life, the soul of man. It was 4.5 years ago, too soon. But still now, 4.5 years later, still now, it's too soon. Okay,
well,
maybe.
He's telling us, though, that it's not about the geometry. It's not about resonance. It's not about tones. It's not about music. So this is,
No, actually, it's about, you watch Mr. Keshe on the May of 2014. I'm showing him the flower of life, and I'm saying, these are the 7 notes of the musical scale, these layers, and the gaps between them, I know represent the whole and half steps like on a piano. And I said, I need to calculate those ratios. That's when Mr. Keshe said, oh, you want the ratios for those? Look at the Keshe Foundation logo. You immediately brought it up. Those are the ratios. It's a version of the ancient navigator's wheel, what the Greeks called the ancient navigator's wheel. It's a tool the ancient Greeks thought their ancestors used to navigate the universe. The Keshe Foundation logo is that.
Which logo are you talking about?
The little ball, the 7 balls. Sometimes there's 8.
The older logo we talk about,
That's
not
right.
the new one, right?
And it's color coded with those frequencies. that are actually 7 musical tones. I don't know if you can pull up that logo. Yeah. See, instead of speculating, go back and see what Mr. Keshe actually had to say about it. Okay, maybe it's still not the right time. Maybe it's too soon. But nonetheless, there it is. Sometimes there's 7, sometimes there's 8. Now look at it as a Russian doll. You put one inside the other, and those are the ratios of the layering of the 7 musical tones. Those represent the frequencies. I was specifically asking Mr. Keshe about the ratios of those that dictate the positioning of the whole and half steps, because it's a navigational tool and I need to know how to calculate those ratios. I know how to do it now.
But again, he tells us that has nothing, that plasma has no frequency, has nothing to do with frequency.
No, he's not said that, Rick. No, he's not said that. He actually said in one of the, I did a transcript of an interview. She says, how do you fly to the moon? He says, so easy. You make yourself a magnetic bubble, you tune it to the frequency of the moon, and off you go. He doesn't say there's no such thing as frequencies. What he's saying is you cannot call it a frequency. Why? Because look at this. This is a plasma. It's ball inside a ball, inside a ball, inside a ball, inside a ball. Each of those has a frequency. So if you just look at it as a frequency, well, then that's like taking a triple core reactor and you have CO2 on the outside and saying that the field strength of this is CO2. Well, no. What do you got in the other containers?
That's exactly the point. You can't measure in frequency because you'd have to be doing thousands of measurements all at once and all the interactions and all the different things, and there's no way to control all that.
No, there is a very easy way to control it. It's called the flower of life in the 7 musical tones. That's why that's been around from the beginning. That's why the man from space uses that tool. That's how you calculate the frequencies. You don't calculate the frequencies. You calculate the ratios. And then it reduces it down to a simple thing. Actually, a simple plasma, every plasma. I forgot, I don't know who the fellow was who was just speaking, talking about the free plasma. You go, every copper atom
is Lawrence.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Lawrence and everybody. A copper atom is not protons, neutrons, and electrons. It's one of these, one inside the other, inside the other. And there's 128 layers of them. That's a standard plasma. It's got 128 frequencies, if you want to call it that. There's actually a spectrum of frequencies going out, but there's a layer inside a layer, inside a layer, inside a layer, inside a layer. Each of those layers has its own skin. Those are organs, just like your heart has a skin, your lungs have a skin. These are Coulomb barriers, one inside the other, mag-grav fields going out, and these are the organs, internal organs. And there's a soul at the center of every single, what you call a free plasma. It's at the center of every single atom. It's not an atom, it's a plasma. It's got its own heartbeat rate based on the difference of the frequencies of all 228 down to a single one. And those numbers represent basic ratios fixed on hydrogen. They calculated they used what's called the Fourier spectral analysis, the harmonic overtone series, to create a baseline of hydrogen, and all of the elements are harmonics of it, literally. That they say, oh, well, no, it's a completely different thing. And that's what you guys are saying, but Mr. Keshe is not saying that. You can't use frequencies, use ratios, and it's a much simpler way to do all the calculations like this. This is a simplified version of actually 128 layers. You don't need all that to do it very accurate. That's the purpose of the flower of life in 7 musical tones as a tool. But here's the thing. You need to go back and see what Mr. Keshe said. Why would Mr. Keshe say it's so important every knowledge seeker needs to understand this? And then none of you guys have gone back to try to understand.
Then what we should do, if you want to put that forward, is to provide a link with the exact point in the videos that Mr. Keshe is saying this, because to go back and review another video is not productive. People are
Rick, the whole video is one subject.
What whole video? Which whole video? The
Nicholas Chua's presentation. Mr. Keshe canceled all the other presenters and said, we're not going anywhere until we understand this.
And that was the one in, what was it?
April of 2014.
2014.
Right. It's easy to find. And you need to watch the whole presentation because Mr. Keshe said it's so important. Every knowledge seeker needs to understand it. And if you go to the fall,
it would be useful to have the actual number of the workshops so people don't have to go through all 5 workshops and go through scrolling through the entire workshop trying to find the little part or the whole workshop or whatever it was that.
Well, it's the whole workshop of April 2014. All you can do is look and see the name of the presentation. Simple as pie. But you really, if everybody here is too lazy to go and look through, I mean, I noticed last week, Denny was trying to find some, he's going through and scrolling through and finding all kinds of stuff, and he doesn't have any problem. There's only 4 workshops. The first workshop in May of 2014, I did the presentation. I'm the first presenter. How much work do I need to do for you guys to get you to go back to the teachings? Okay, I'm just saying, this is what Mr. Keshe has said to do, not me. I've done it, and I've been doing it, and I've been studying it, and I've gone through every single teaching Mr. Keshe has taught over the past 5 years. So, I mean, I'm not saying, I'm just saying, instead of speculating, it's really easy. Go back, find those workshops, and answer those questions yourself directly from Mr. Keshe. Okay, I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be belligerent here. It's just that I'm seeing everybody speculating. There's a free plasma is a soul. Everything has a soul. Everything has a soul. Every copper atom, whether it's nano-coated or not, is a plasma. It's got a soul. It's memory. It is the essence of memory. Magnetic fields remember everything. It takes up space. It's got a mass, and it's got intelligence. It remembers and can correlate information. It's got a body structure, and like every other entity in the universe, they're all plasmas. Everything in the universe is made of a plasma. There aren't atoms. The difference between copper and hydrogen is they're both plasmas. They're both magnetic fields and containers. What differs one from the other is how fast the outer layer is beating, like a heart. Everything's got a heartbeat. It's an energy package, Mrs. Keshe said. So the difference between copper and hydrogen is their energy output, how fast they're beating relative to each other, right? This is a really important thing. They're all the same but different. They say in Thailand, same but different. Right? And the behavior of copper here is based on the interaction of the fields in the earth condition, based on hydrogen. Copper is, Armen called it 62, by the way. I don't know if he misspoke, but I go with Armen. I think that number is the one that's probably the most correct number. And those periodic table of elements numbers are really wholly unreliable because whenever you mix any two, you have to account for 25 to 50% margin of error, right? But only the earlier ones.
Sorry, you broke up on the last sentence.
They're energy packages. Energy is defined as the ability to do work, which is defined as motion. The particular motion of a plasma is beating. And within the structure, it's got rivers of energy, just like your heart's got arteries and veins. The rivers go out, they come back around and loop back in. It's exactly what every entity has. It's got its own metabolism. So the metabolism of copper is whatever its number is, 62 times more energetic, faster heartbeat at the outer layer than hydrogen. That's what makes them different, and that's how they manifest themselves in our environment. See, this is the free plasma. Mr. Keshe said this before. Every free plasma is a soul. It's a soul, but every plasma is a plasma. The free plasma is the one you created that from your star formation. But in every single one of those, the first time of free plasma, you guys, Rick, you guys and Vince, and you guys had the free plasma, you could see hollow centers in the center of your little ping pong ball reactors that were generating that. That meant every one of those reactors now has a soul. They're part of the body of the structure of the free plasma. Yeah? So if you don't have that little empty free plasma at the center of each of your ping pong balls, you don't have life. It's just random fields. But as soon as you get the free plasma, it links those reactors. So everything has a free plasma. It's the soul. You have one in the center of your brain. There's one in every single atom. It's a plasma, right? If it's a plasma, it has a soul. It's a living entity. So, but anyway, okay, sorry, I don't mean to. I'm just suggesting that we all go back to the teachings, which is what Mr. Keshe said, and look at those. That it's April and May of 2014. You can find them very easily. The whole workshop is devoted to that in April, and the first presenter is me in May. It's really easy to find those, and you go to the second kids workshop. The other one I can't remember, but the 7th health workshop. Those are workshops worth looking into. You can skip past Dr. Elliott's presentation. That's the 7th health workshop. Go right to Mr. Keshe's teaching. Easy enough to find if you really want to know the information. And then
I put the link in the chat from the 7th health workshop. And Rick, maybe you should promote Brad, Pavel, and Sander as a panelist.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm done. I just had that spiel on my mind for a while, and I know I sounded a little bit frustrated and all, but I just think that maybe.
Well, I know that you've been pursuing this for a long time with a vengeance and with a understanding that you know is important, and I know it's really, really important for you, and that you've spent a lot of time with this. So therefore, I know that you have the basis of knowledge, and you've been here for a long time, and so on. So I know that it's important, and I've touched on a lot of your teachings with these ideas and so on. So it is a big thing, and we do need to review in order to get a better understanding, perhaps. So
yeah, well, I just want to say when Nicholas first brought up the presentation, I thought it was so irrelevant. I didn't see any relevance to Mr. Keshe's teachings, plasma, whatever. I mean, I said, what the heck is this? This doesn't have anything to do with Mr. Keshe's teaching. And then Mr. Keshe came in and said, stop, this is so important. Every knowledge seeker needs to understand this. That's why it was so important to me, because back then, the whole focus was free energy. It was before Nicholas, before Alex. It was before Vernon and Renan and Vernie with the pain pads. It was before even the Chinese guy with the orange on the container, right? So it's before. You see how those applications have opened up since then. But this subject was something that Mr. Keshe said we all really need to understand. That's why it was important to me. But everybody else's focus is on free energy. Rick, if you remember the presentation when I did it, I know it was a long time and you don't remember, but you remember if you think about it, you go back, when I started doing my follow-up on the Flower of Life, it was supposed to be a guy named Lucas who had a design for a battery. He didn't even have the battery, but a design for a plasma battery he had promised the week before. And he was supposed to do his presentation, but his father got in an accident, he was late, and I had to do my presentation first. So here I am, got the drawings of the universe on the screen. And I'm talking to Mr. Keshe about how to calculate the ratios to be able to map the universe and plot positions, talking about the essence of creation, the basis of spaceship technology. Mr. Keshe is showing me how to draw Coulomb barrier. And if you remember, you said, Mario, I'm going to have to cut you short. You were very gracious about it, but there were comments. What's this guy talking about? We want Luca. We want Lucas. We want free, energy. Get rid of this guy, blah, 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 right? See, so that was the focus, and not one person ever followed up on it. And I know Mr. Keshe said, they're not ready for this. That was 4.5 years ago. And now one person has gone back to that far to the teachings. See, so I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be belligerent here. I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do. I'm just pointing out that the one single subject that is more important than any other is the one that none of you have gone back to. So anyway, okay, I'm done with my spiel here, Rick.
All right, well, very good. It might be a good time now before the private teachings start and there's more action and more things going on and so forth. We have this space now. Maybe it's a good time to do some reviewing of that. And thank you for that, pointing out that particular time when these teachings came out. Maybe if someone can find the exact points, or maybe particular points that Mr. Keshe is expounding on at that time, and then we could have the exact link to the time in the video, that would be useful for people here if someone can come up with that. Okay, thank you, Mario. It was good to hear from you again and be reminded of that.
Hey, Rick, can I just jut in for a second, my friend?
And who are you, Brett? I mean, who are you?
Just a silly knowledge seeker.
All right. From the other side of the world.
What Mario? Sorry, go on.
From the other side of the planet, from where a lot of us live, at least. But,
down under, mate.
Yeah.
Down under. Hey, I've actually been thinking a little bit along the lines of Mario, and I had one of those, eureka moments the other day, and because I was thinking about not the flower of life, but the 7 belts around the planet. So let's just go back. I'm putting a presentation together just so that I can understand it and explain it to other people. And it starts off with, if I take a tree in front of me and I get a chainsaw and cut it off at the base, what have I done? Killed the tree. What's the difference between it being alive and being dead? You'll see the method to my madness in just a moment. So I'm calling the presentation the spark of life, because the only difference between the physicality of the tree that's sitting in front of you, it's the physicality, yeah, sure. But is it alive? No, it's not, because you just chopped it off. It is, its cells are alive. It still has the swinging waves within it. But essentially, the physical soul that made the plant just left. The spark of life. If it doesn't have the spark of life anymore, it has left the physicality, but where does it go? And this is where my train of thoughts are happening at the moment, and where you'll understand why I'm saying that Mario's thoughts are my thoughts, is that it's not necessarily the flower of life, but the 7 belts that are all the different life forms on this planet live when they go. When you kill the tree, you kill the lamb, you kill that life form, where does it go? It's not dead. It's never died. It's part of creation. So there are 7 belts around the planet. And here's what I'm about to embark on. The embarkation is about learning about what animals live in what belt. When you take away the physicality, it has to live somewhere. And there are 7 belts. So what my, I suppose, evolution is to understand and comprehend what animals live at what belt, how long they stay there before they come into the physicality again, and so on and so on and so on, up to the human being at the 7th belt. So my understanding of evolution is to understand and comprehend the entirety of the bubble that we live in. So Mario's right. It's all about the number 7. But I think that the only thing that Mario is concentrating on isn't where I'm at. I'm more at the, let's just call it esoteric level, where you're thinking about things that you don't know, that you can't comprehend, and then using it as a mirror to look at life on the planet and see how it lives. So there I'll know where to place it. So to me, this is evolution. And I hope that I've given clarity to Mario's talk. Thanks, mate.
Brett, can I come in here for a second? All right. Look, actually, I didn't say everything's about 7. I said that the 7 musical tones is used as a tool to differentiate the octaves. You could say it's all about octaves. You could say the octave needs a container, which would be the 9th layer. So you could say everything's in cycles of 9. You could say that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you could say it's about 1, 2, 3. This is not my point. My point is, instead of speculating about what the universe is, what the earth is, and what these things are, go back to Mr. Keshe's teaching about it specifically. That's what I'm saying. Don't guess. Don't take my word for it. Don't assume that I'm saying something. Go back and see what Mr. Keshe has to say about it specifically. I gave the points. You can find the teachings. Stop speculating without the direct sources from Mr. Keshe. That's what I'm saying, because he has taught it.
Mario, I am capable of thought on my own. I do not need Mr. Keshe to give me direction or information. I get it from my own spirit form. I form my own opinions about what I need to do personally. This is a personal thing. Personally, for me to, I need to understand what you've said and the way that you've portrayed it. I'm agreeing with you with everything. Absolutely everything. I agree with you 100%. But now let's look at the next layer. You know, we can't keep concentrating on the one matter state thing. We've got to expand our thinking. So let's start to think about the next 7 layers, the spiritual form. Because what's happening, Mario, is that did you see in one of the latest teachings, Mr. Keshe drew all of the way that the technology were about I think about 4 or 5 little bars, and then he goes, and now whoop, you're going to go back to the beginning. Back to the beginning. So there some things that you don't see either, and sometimes that I get something and I try to share it with everybody. But this spiritual thing is where we're at. The technology that Mr. Keshe is pushing us into is the spiritual. it's another realm. It's another. You know, creating life forms is another. I mean, like, you're playing with energies that, unless you're peaceful, you will not learn. You will not be able to make it. Because you haven't comprehended the whole picture. The whole picture is the spiritual energy, and using the spiritual energy itself to give back. By you giving it something, it gives back to you, but you get more. You get to use what you're capable of understanding how to use. Are you getting the way that I'm thinking, Mario? It's not in no way an attack on you. I have loved your classes. As you know, in the beginning, I might have been a bit standoffish, but then I joined your classes and I learned what you had to say, and I took it on board, and I think wholeheartedly that you were right in every way.
Well, thank you, Brett. And I'm not making a criticism of anybody's thought processes, but this is the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group meeting. So I'm just saying that the closer we stick to Mr. Keshe's teachings here, the more we understand Mr. Keshe's teachings. So if people are not familiar with Mr. Keshe's teachings about specific subjects that he has done specifically, then, well, we're missing some vital information, which is what Mr. Keshe has been saying. We all need to go back to the teachings. So all I'm saying is, before anybody speculates about whether the flower of life is or is not relevant, we need to go back and see what Mr. Keshe says. Instead of just dismissing, you know, oh, it's not about the universal, well, or whatever, then, you know, from what? If somebody says to me, hey, I watched that video and you're wrong, Mr. Keshe didn't say that, he said this, I would say, oh, wow, okay, I need to go check that myself. That would be a valid criticism. But to have somebody, everybody, to one degree or another, tell me that it's not relevant and they haven't even watched the video, or if they did, they don't even remember what he said, then that's not a valid criticism. That's just speculation and throwing out Mr. Keshe's teaching, you know, which is a mistake. It's a mistake to throw away Mr. Keshe's teaching without even looking into it, right? That's all I'm saying. Don't take what I'm saying as fact. I could be wrong, like, you know, 7 musical tones. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe Mr. Keshe was saying the 12 musical tones. What, you know, somebody going to go back and check my work? No, just going to dismiss it out of hand without bothering to go back. See, this is the thing. Again and again and again, I use the statement before almost any time I do a presentation. I consistently say at the preface of my sentences, and Mr. Keshe in this workshop said this, Mr. Keshe said this here, and Mr. Keshe said this here. I use that statement more than any single other person I've ever heard do any presentation ever. And I never hear anybody go back to see whether it's correct or not, you know? So I'm basing everything I'm saying here directly on Mr. Keshe's teachings. I spent 40,000 hours in the past 5 years studying Mr. Keshe's teachings. When I hear the guys with the PhDs, what Mr. Keshe called their PhDs in stupidity, I don't believe them. I don't listen to them. I don't believe in Stephen Hawking and black holes. I don't believe in the atomic structures with atoms and electrons and electron shells. And I don't believe in that stuff because I'm going to Mr. Keshe. Mr. Keshe says this, I'll go with that. And I didn't believe Mr. Keshe either. I followed up on it. I checked it. I've come to the point now where I've had so much confirmation of Mr. Keshe that I will take what he says on faith, because he's already proven to me, to my satisfaction, in the previous things, that even if I don't understand it, I will accept that. But I didn't at first. I checked everything. I went through every teaching, you know. I mean, when I first started 5 years ago, it was the beginning of the kids' workshops, the health workshops. There were workshops 5 days a week, sometimes 2 a day. And in my time zone, because my lifestyle is I play a few hours at night, a few nights a week. The rest of the time is free for me to study. And so I'm addicted to learning. My teacher used to have a saying, beauty's in the pursuit of knowledge, not the attaining of it. So I've had this love of addiction of the pursuit of knowledge. As soon as I saw Mr. Keshe, it was one of the first teachings was the second kids workshop. I saw that. I went, oh my God, that's the fractal pattern of the universe. I had been studying Oliver Heaviside's book and Eric Dollar's teaching, no such thing as electrons, it's all plasma fields. So here's Mr. Keshe coming along saying that and then taking it to the next level. That was it. So I would wake up in the morning, because in my time, the workshops didn't start until like noon or something like that. I would wake up in the morning, have my coffee, and started going back to the previous workshops, right? So after a couple of months of that, I would wake up in the morning and watch the second and third Knowledge Seekers workshop, and later in the afternoon, watch the 62nd or 63rd Knowledge Seekers workshop. So I had a perspective of seeing a year and a half's worth of teaching over a couple of months. So I knew what was taught, Plus I did the transcripts working with the Chinese Keshe Foundation with Lisa and Max, 7 or 8 kids workshops, 7 or 8 health workshops, plus a couple of the Knowledge Seekers workshops. And they only wanted transcripts. I later went back, bought the closed captioning program. Remember, right? Rick, you told me where to buy it, right? I downloaded that. I went back through all those ones that I had the transcripts for. I went back a second time through them, put the time codes in. So it's like I got them memorized. You know what I mean? It's not like, and I'm watching something that, like to you guys, Mr. Keshe mentioned a year and a half ago from that perspective. And he's teaching something now. I saw it 3 days ago, right? So I had this really, just because of the way life worked out, I had this perspective of going back, cross-checking, going back to this one, looking at that. I've read the transcripts. I had that memorized. I know what he said there and so on. So I'm just saying, everything I'm saying here, I'll never say, and Stephen Hawking said, or scientists found this, or blah, 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 the PhDs in stupidity, they're talking about that. Never. I always say, Mr. Keshe said this. Mr. Keshe talked about that. This is in this workshop. This is based on Mr. Keshe's teaching. Everything I've ever presented here, if it's my speculation, I always say, okay, this is based on Mr. Keshe's teaching, but I'm not sure about this. I think this has to be correct because of this. And I'll always differentiate between my speculation and direct teachings from Mr. Keshe. And so I'm just saying, I'm basing everything I'm saying here and I've ever shown based directly on Mr. Keshe's teachings. And if it's not directly from Mr. Keshe, I will say that. This is what I think is going on here, but I'm not sure, or whatever, So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying, Brett, you're wrong, or that you can't have your own spiritual ideas. I'm just saying, for me, I'm trying to understand Mr. Keshe's teaching based on Mr. Keshe's teaching, not on my speculation about what I think that could mean. I can have it, and I might be right or I might be wrong, but that's all I'm saying here, that we need to do what Mr. Keshe said, go back to the teachings. Yeah, and I'm just offering that as a suggestion for everybody here. So anyway, Brett, I'm not trying to criticize you or anybody, I'm just saying there are specific teachings of Mr. Keshe about things I hear again and again here, and people are speculating on it. And I'm going, well, that's not what Mr. Keshe said there. That's not what he was teaching over there. And I know where they are, a lot of them, Sometimes I can't pinpoint it, but I'm saying, well, geez, didn't you guys go back and watch that Flower of Life presentation? Didn't you go back and watch the presentation about atomic structures? And the answer is, well, no. So I'm scratching my head here, literally right now, because I think a mosquito's getting me. No. I'm going, wow, why not? That's all. So I'm just offering this to, present a perspective.
Yeah, well, once again, we probably could have spent the last hour or two going through the videos rather than talking about going through the videos, but we have to have specific places to go to. Otherwise, we're pawing through the videos for 2 hours rather than going to the specific places where the information is. So this is why we need to have links in order to talk about them and remind people, or tell them, look, go to this specific section, read this, or watch this video, and then we'll talk about it next week or something. So
yeah, but Rick, at the end of the day, it's up to each individual. How much do you really want to understand? You have to do it yourself. Like your position, Rick, if you did what I was doing, spending all day going back and watching the videos, watching them 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, doing transcript, then who would be hosting the workshops and posting them for me to be able to do it? You had to do what you're doing. If you did what I was doing, then nobody would be doing anything that would allow either one of us to do. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm not criticizing you or anybody. We're all doing what we're supposed to do here. You have to do what you're doing so that I can do what I'm doing. And so here I'm presenting this to people who are now coming in and having their own ideas about it and just saying, look, these workshops are really, really important. April and May of 2014, Flower of Light, Nicholas Chua presenting, my presenting. You don't need the exact number. And if the whole May workshop is Flower of Life, you need every drop of information in there. And my presentation is the first presentation. So you don't need the time code. And again, you need every drop of information that's in there, excluding where I'm saying what Mr. Keshe has to say. And it's there. And the 7th health workshop and the 2nd kids workshop, actually all of the kids workshops, to be honest,
absolutely. I've always thought they were some of the most powerful teachings from Mr. Keshe.
Yeah, he uses the basic language. Like in all the other workshops, he has to speak, to nuclear physicists. So he talks about atoms and electrons and black holes and he in the medical, he speaks many languages. But the kids' workshop is raw plasma language. The most.
Yeah, that's right.
So
it is highly advised to go back and check them out for sure. Listen to Mario's advice. He's right on this. So that's something that people can do. Again, we have maybe a bit more free time the next couple of weeks than after that in terms of the plasma teachings and whatnot. So it might be a good time. Maybe it would be a good topic to bring up again next week. And we'll see who is able to review and come up with some of that basic information that we could refer to. Okay, well, that's probably good enough on that for now. Thank you, Mario. Really appreciate your reminding us. And do we have anything else to be reminded of here? Is there any other topics anyone would like to bring up? Or any devices you have that's been created or other such things?
Well, I want to share just that I use the time of the free private teachings here, our holiday, to review the 14 blueprint teachings. Again, because last Thursday, Mr. Keshe said, if you want to look for the plasma generator, just look at the blueprint teachings. It's all in there. So I reviewed them. I'm 80% done. And I just want to confirm what Mario said. At that point of time, 2015, I watched them live, but I was so focused on the free energy thing. When I look now them a second time, there's so much more into the normal Markgraf, which you can buy from the Italy factory or even from the USA factory. You can make food, you can make materials, you can make so much out of it. I totally did miss that point. So because I was so focused on the electricity at that point of time when I watched that live, that the last 14 days, I got so many new ideas for experiments So I just ordered 10 kilo new copper wires to be able to perform these experiments. I just really would like to confirm what Maria says. We really have to get more back to the teachings. But you see, he also said, for example, when you host so many meetings, you don't have so much time to do experiments. And it's the same like me. I ask now for be a host here for the next semester. And I have so many other projects. I would like to make a children plasma class here in Hua Hin in Thailand. So the day has only 24 hours. And if you have a family and have a 2.5-year-old kid and a 12-year-old daughter, there is not so much time left when there are normal semesters where you have to watch 2 teachings a day from Monday to Friday. There's not enough time to review the teachings again and again, because every time when you review them, you recognize something new. So I really think you have to watch every teaching 3 times. But there are thousands of hours.
Thousands of hours, yes.
Teachings. You want to review 200 teachings 3 times. When you want to do that? No chance.
Yep, we just need several lives all at once to live. So that's where we have to basically live several lives all at the same time. So you have your science side and your personal side and all that. Like Mr. Keshe has gone through his life. He's created all this stuff, the patents, the teachings, and the Keshe Foundation itself, and all of the different councils and peace initiatives and various things. And he's also lived a life. He's also has children, a wife, and a life that he's lived. So of course he doesn't sleep much. Go ahead, Jalal.
Hi, Rick. Hi, everyone. Can I say only one thing? Plasma is one. We all agree of that. So for everyone who is listening, don't limit it yourself. That's all. Creation, universe, unicos, there is no limitation. So when there is no limitation, there is no something fix, like Rick fix everything. So don't fix your own books and you limit it yourself. That's all. Thank you. And all of you. And Mario, I love your work. I respect it very, very well. And your breath. But just put in your head, don't limit it yourself in one vehicle or one limitation of transportation. There is millions of them. Thank you. And also, Mr. Keshe said he wants to take you out as equal. So in which equality you want? You want a donkey, or you want the car, or you want the plane, or you want the rocket, or you want the spiritual way and light. So even the light is limited. So don't limit it yourself, my guys. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your advice there, Jalal. Is there anybody else who would like to put some advice in now while it's advising time? Give some guidance and direction. Aaron in the chat says, I'm from Delta, BC, Canada, and if anyone here is from BC, I would like a teacher if they are willing. Well, you might be able to find a personal teacher, but you might find someone that can teach you the basics of the hands-on workshops, perhaps, in Delta there, which is actually pretty close to me. But you can also get a lot from the various teachings that are already out there and the private teachings, of course. It's hard to find a personal teacher these days, but you might find someone through the distributors, and there's a listing of Keshe Foundation distributors and people that are involved that way. So there might be someone in the Delta area that'd be willing to help. Okay, we're coming up on 4 hours here. I'd like to shut down relatively soon, unless there's something that someone would like to bring up. So, opportunities here once again for a topic or something else that someone would like to bring up, comment on. Delia asks, who's the guy who presented his GANs blobs? The GANs blobs, that was Tommy from, I believe he's from Winnipeg. He's not here right now, so he left earlier. I think he's under Tommy Gunn in Facebook, G-U-N-N, Tommy Gunn. Okay, anything else? Going once, going twice. Okay, I think we'll close things down then. So, don't forget to review your earlier teachings. Was it April of 2014 especially? Might be good to just touch on them, and just sometimes even a few lines to hear is enough to jog your memory or to jog your ability to search further or to make the connection that few words that you needed for the last years in order to make some connection, that some part of the teaching that may have been missing, and that can help you get to the next level. That's what it's really all about, is elevating ourselves to the next level. Sometimes it takes a little bit of information, or sometimes a certain experience will key it off for us. And bingo, we can flash off to the next dimension. Okay, Aaron says, is the plasma capable of being mixed in a 3D print mold? Well, yes, you can mix the GANs in with the 3D printing materials, definitely. People have done that, I believe, and that's definitely something for the future to think about. I think that is the way of the future, actually, is to 3D print the actual GANs materials and perhaps the nano-materials themselves. But that's a topic for another day. Okay, I think I'll shut things down for now. Remind people that the Knowledge Seekers Workshop is coming up once again on Thursday morning, 9 o'clock a.m. Central European Time. And we'll have conversations with Mr. Keshe and other knowledge seekers as usual. And what is it, 240, I think it is. Is that correct? I think it's 240 knowledge seekers workshops we've gone through now. All right, so let's close down then and call it a day, night, or morning, wherever you happen to be. Okay, let's stop the live stream first. Thank you, everybody in the live stream, for your questions and comments there, and for the other streams as well. And we'll shut down the Zoom and